we will make a start. It's after 10 now, so I would like to move things on. Now, everybody I'm seeing on the screen at the moment who is participating at some point, either today or later in the week, you can all hear me okay? Just raise your hand if you can't hear me at all. Okay, brilliant, thank you. Right, my name is Claire Milne. As you know, I'm a reporter with the Planning and Environmental Appeals Division of Scottish Government. We're also called the DPA, so I'll use that just as a much easier abbreviation of what we're called. This hearing is in connection with an application under Section 36 of the Electricity Act 1989 by Intelligent Land Investments Limited. The proposal is to construct a pumped storage scheme comprising of an electrical generating station with a capacity of more than 50 megawatts. The Highland Council objects to the application, and accordingly, Scottish ministers decided that an inquiry should be held into the proposal. So my role as a reporter appointed to deal with this case by Scottish ministers is to hear the evidence that will be presented over the next few days, and thereafter report to ministers with a recommendation on whether or not to approve or not approve the proposed development. And the ministers will consider my report before they make a decision. So back in the 19th of May of this year, I held a pre-examination meeting virtually. So we've had a trial run at this, which is good, I think. This considered the processes to be adopted in this case, which are all set out in the note that I produced of that meeting. I also explained at the meeting that the procedures that we're going to follow are those set out in the Code of Practice for Electricity Act cases. Now, these are modelled on the most up-to-date procedures that relate to planning appeals and which are set out in the latest regulations. This is normal practice that we would follow these procedures, and parties were agreeable to following that approach. Now, given the unprecedented circumstances that we're facing at the moment with the coronavirus pandemic and with the physical restrictions regarding physical distancing in place, the restrictions, I decided that a combination of further written submissions and a virtual hearing was the most suitable way to proceed in this particular case. And that was set out in the note of my meeting. I haven't had any objections to proceeding in that way, so that's the way I intend to proceed this week. The main topics to be examined and those requiring further procedure were agreed at the pre-examination meeting, and these are all set out in my note. Now, the written submissions covered a number of issues, and I'll just quickly touch on all those just to see where we're at with all of those. So they covered the topic of flood risk and seismic activity, the head pond embankment, land use and habitat, protected species, ornithology, noise, traffic and transport, cultural heritage, conditions and legal agreement, and wider operational aspects. I also requested further submissions on generating capacity and net benefits of the proposal, and also planning and energy policy. So I'm of the view at this stage that all of the written submissions are concluded, including a statement of agreed matters between the applicant and the council, which has also been submitted. I understand there will be an update regarding the position of Scottish and Southern Energy, and that's imminent. I think I got a note last week, so I'll be asking for an update on that. And if necessary, if I needed to ask for any further information, written submissions, I could do that after the hearing. So, having considered the written submissions and subsequent exchanges, I've decided to hold two hearing sessions on two matters. The first of those will be the generating capacity and net benefits of the proposal, and the second will be landscape and visual impacts. So before I set up the timetable and process I intend to follow today, there are a few formalities to cover. So I'd like to just run through, just to make sure I'm clear as to who is going to be participating in each of the sessions. So taking part in session 1, which will take place today, for the applicant, I have Douglas Armstrong QC, I have Mr. Robert Hull, I have Mr. Ian Gillies, and I have Catherine Anderson. Ian Gillies and Catherine Anderson of ACOM. Is that correct? If you could.
That is correct, yes.
Thank you. Catherine, I can see you there. If you want to put your hand up, that's fine as well. You don't need to put your audio on. Mr. Hull, you're in the centre of my screen there. Yes, okay. And Mr. Gillies. Yes, great, thank you. Also taking part in session 1, I have Ms. Fiona Henderson, who's a local resident. Ms. Henderson, you're there, thank you. Now that's everybody taking part in session 1. Moving on to session 2, for the applicant, I have Douglas Armstrong QC. I have Ruth Morritson of ACON. Is that correct? Douglas, if you could maybe confirm that, or Catherine, I think you're nodding. Yes, okay.
Yes.
And also taking part in session 2, for the council, I have James Finley QC and the council's witness, Dr. Guy Wimble. Ms. Lyons, could you confirm that? Thank you. I'm just about to do that. Okay, thank you. Now, there are numerous people observing the proceedings, including the council's principal solicitor, the planning officer, the applicant's representatives. There's also members of the local community and community councils as well that are observing behind the scenes at this session and later on the week, I understand. But at this stage, I am not expecting anyone else to take part except those previously mentioned by name. So I'm hoping I'm correct with that. If there's anybody that wants to raise anything at this stage in relation to people taking part, could they pop that on a message to me? Perhaps that's the easiest way to do it. If there's any issues, and I can take that up. But that's my understanding at this stage. Okay, now moving on to other matters. So given the current restrictions, I issued some advice last week, which you would have seen a note that I issued in advance to all parties regarding the procedures to be adopted in this virtual hearing. And please could you all note the content of that advice and the need to maintain physical distancing at all times. And I will be keeping an eye on that. It's very important that as a government, Scottish Government event, that we do follow those procedures. Can you also please ensure that your mobile phones are on silent? I understand you might still need to use them to communicate with one another, but please keep them switched on silent so they don't interrupt proceedings. As agreed at the pre-examination meeting, during the current period of restrictions, the council is not required to place the documents for this case on deposit. So the documents have been published on the DPA website. In normal circumstances, the DPA would do a live broadcast of hearings and inquiries. Given the current restrictions, it's not going to be possible. However, we are recording this hearing and the hearing sessions later in the week, and they will be subsequently published on our website. The parties involved will already be aware of that approach that's been done before. I explained at the pre-examination meeting that all of the written material that has already been lodged will be taken into account, including that relating to matters not the subject of these hearing sessions. I just want to stress again that the procedure used for assessing a particular matter, whether by hearing or written representation, need bear no relation to the potential significance of that matter in determining the final outcome. I also want to underline that the only matters that we will be discussing at the hearing sessions are those which fall under the subject heading of each session, and that should flow from the evidence which has already been shared amongst the parties. Hearings are a way of letting each of you put your point of view across, while also letting me get the information I need to make my recommendation to Scottish ministers. So the hearing will be a structured discussion led by me, and it'll be based on the circulated agendas that I've already put out. And as you'll note in the agendas, I've put forward a series of questions, and hopefully we can work through them in a logical order. I don't think there's any real need to read out your hearing statements. I think the idea is that we will work through each of the questions, and that will probably tease out all of the matters that are needing to be discussed. I will decide who to ask about a particular item first. Some questions might be better directed at the applicant first, or their particular witness, or the interested party, or sometimes they might be better directed at the council. But I will also give the other party a chance to comment. There will be no cross-examination. This is a hearing session, but you can ask questions of each other through me if you wish. When I've decided that I have enough information about a particular issue, I will move on to the next item. So I'm going to keep things moving quite quickly, particularly as this is being done virtually. So I think it will be quite tiring for everybody. Please bear in mind that I must note the discussion, and my ability to do this will be affected by the speed and nature of the exchange. So please can I ask anyone who's not being asked to speak to mute, to allow me to properly hear and understand the comments that are being made by the person speaking at that time. We'll just keep an eye on that and see how that works. The hearing has been scheduled for 3 days in total. The session 1 is going to start immediately after my introductions, and it is scheduled to conclude today. Given that it's being conducted by video conference, I've indicated a maximum sitting period of between 1.5 and 2 hours just to avoid visual fatigue. I think that's probably sensible, but we'll see how we all feel on that. We can determine a suitable point in the proceedings to introduce a break if necessary. Session 2 is scheduled to take place over 2 days on Thursday and Friday of this week. Now we've got those full days if we need them. Can you please note the start time for each of those days, which is 9:30, not 10 o'clock. I brought that a little bit further forward. And again, I've restricted the sitting periods and the times that we might sit. So we'll pick up an appropriate point in the proceedings to take a suitable break. I'm just going to ask those people that are on the screen at the moment, who I can see, that they are okay with those arrangements and they have no issues they wish to raise about the procedures that we're going to have for the hearing sessions. If you have any issues you want to raise, could you put your hand up? Okay, great, thank you. Just a couple of things just to finish off. Closing statements. I thought it might be quite useful at this point in time, because I think they are going to be necessary in relation to the hearing session matters, and it'd be very useful while everyone's here to outline the possible dates for closing submissions. And we did touch on this a little bit in email correspondence after the pre-examination meeting. Now, I'm thinking of a couple of dates, and maybe check our diaries now. So for session 1 and session 2, the dates for Ms Henderson and for Highland Council to submit their closing statements could be the Monday the 14th of September. And then for the applicant, another 7 days after that, which would be Monday the 21st of September. Okay, so I'm just going to see if anybody's got any issues. Again, if you want to, if that's a problem and if those dates don't work for you, please could you raise your hand and we can talk through that. Okay, I'm not seeing any problems with those dates. It's useful just to have people here to just confirm that. I will cover that again in beginning of session 2, just to make sure that the participants taking part in session 2, but not everyone is here today, are okay with those submission dates. But if we can provisionally put the 14th of September and the 21st of September into the diaries, we'll go with those for now. Another matter to raise is the site inspection. Just so you're aware, I've already carried out an unaccompanied site inspection, and I will carry out further visits if necessary after the hearing. I feel I need to revisit any of the viewpoints particularly. Now, these will also be unaccompanied, and that's what we agreed at the pre-examination meeting. Okay, well, I've reached the end of my introduction. There's nothing much more I need to say. Is everyone clear about the procedures I've outlined? I think there's nobody's raising their hand, so I understand that everything's clear. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to the session 1? Okay, right, I'm not seeing anybody raising their hand at this stage. That's good. Right, so for session 1 and the participants that we have, I'll just get everybody on the screen that needs to be on the screen that's taking part. So for the applicant, it'll be Douglas Armstrong, QC, we have Mr. Robert Hull, we have Ian Gillies, and we have Catherine Anderson of ACOM. And it will be Miss Fiona Henderson, an interested party. So can everybody else come off the main screen, if you could please, and just close your video down. Perfect, thank you. That makes it a lot easier for me to see all the faces on what is quite a small screen at the moment. Right, what I'm thinking of doing is moving straight into the session. If at any point anybody would want a small break, you know, please let me know and we can introduce that. And just a second. There's a couple of things we can do. We can have we can just pause for 5 minutes, or we can have what are breakout rooms that have been set up. There's 3 breakout rooms been set up. There's a breakout room for the applicant, a breakout room for the Highland Council, and there's a breakout room for interested parties. So at any point during any of the sessions, if we decide to have a breakout, Callum has set these up so that you all respectively in your groups go into those breakout rooms. When the time is up to come out of that break, a note will be sent by Callum, and that will come through to you on the screen, and then you're able to come back into the hearing sessions. Okay. Could everybody have the agenda in front of them? As I said, I'm going to try and take each of the questions in turn. It may be necessary to perhaps jump about a little bit if certain things overlap. I understand some subjects are not discreetly set up in the way, and the answers that are given perhaps might touch on other matters as well. So we'll do our best to follow it in the kind of headings and the way that I've set out, if that's okay. It'll certainly be easier for my notes if we can do that. So the first heading that I've put up is about the generating capacity and demand of the project. The first question I have is the nature, is really around the nature of the proposal. And this has been raised in some of the representations. And I suppose it's a little bit down to just, there's not many of these projects come forward, and you know, they're quite unique, and understanding what is behind the projects as well. And the first question I had is really to the applicant. The nature of the proposal, but also, is it correct that it's not to describe it as a renewable energy project, which I think is some of the misunderstandings that some people did get originally, given that it does not produce renewable energy. Now, I'm not sure who's best to answer that. Would it be perhaps someone from ACOM, or would it be Mr. Hull? I'm not sure. Does anybody want to come in? Mr. Armstrong, do you want to come in?
Ma'am, if I start, I think probably it would be Mr. Gillies and then Mr. Hull that might be best sort of explaining this, and if they do it in that order. And obviously the background for this is set out in the hearing statement for this session at paragraphs 118 to paragraph 122, and also in the EIA report at volume 2, chapter 1, that's production number ILI 802, and paragraphs 1.2.8 to 1.2.10, which sets out the concept of pump storage, and then specifically in relation to the proposal at paragraph 1.2.11. But I think if I pass over to Ian Guinness to start off with, and then he will pass on to Robert Hull just to sort of set out a bit more of the explanation. But these are the documents that you'll essentially find the explanation and background in.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Yes, Mr. Hull, Mr. Gillies, do you want to individually? Do you want to? Who's best to speak first? Mr. Gillies, do you want to unmute and come in? I don't mind if you both want to unmute at the stage. It's if you can talk between you, that'd be fine.
I think Mr. Gillies is having some difficulty with his
okay.
audio. Is that a problem? He could come round and sit on my seat and do that. We are actually in the same room, and that might be the easiest thing to do. Do you want to come around here? Or I can.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Sorry, yeah, he's trying it. Can you hear Mr. Gillies?
Mr. Gillies, could you speak again, just so I can see if I can hear you?
Sure.
It's not a very good audio.
Just bear with us for a second. I think we have hopefully sorted the problem, and Mr. Gillies have come on now. I think he needs to be let in on another by phone.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there anything we need to do our end?
I think perhaps Callum has got to unmute. We've pressed the...
Yeah, I've tried asking Mr. Gillies if he's able to unmute using the asked to unmute option in the participant list, but it doesn't seem to be working at all. Mr. Gillies, in the bottom left of your screen, is there the unmute button? No.
I think, Callum, this was a problem that I had also when we did our trial, if you remember, that
Yeah,
there was
it's,
that the
I think it's slightly different because when me and you had problems, there was no option of the microphone being on at all, whereas with Mr. Gillies here, it says the microphone is there.
What the alternative we could try is Mr. Gillies could move to Fraser Mitchell's computer, and can we do it that way, perhaps?
That should be fine, I think, as long as you're happy with that.
Yeah, we can do that. Swap seats.
Yeah.
Okay.
Got to press on that.
Hey, maybe try again.
Yes, we can hear you now, much clearer.
Sorry about that.
Okay, that's fine. Little bit of feedback, unfortunately. We'll just make sure if we can try and keep that to a minimum.
Everybody switched off.
Okay, Mr. Gillies, do you want to start talking? Let's see how we get on.
Sure. So just waiting for the echo to go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that one.
No, mine's on mute. Mine is muted.
Sorry, Claire. Is everyone else muted?
I think everyone else is muted. It might be a problem due to everyone sitting near each other. Sorry.
How's that now?
That's
That's
better.
better.
I'm off mute.
Can
you hear me okay?
Yeah, yes, we can hear you. Yeah, and we haven't got the echo. No, I don't think. Let's
Great.
try. Okay.
Okay, so apologies for that IT glitch. Sorry about that. So just to go into the point about whether this can be considered a project that delivers renewable energy. So it's the developments are an electricity storage facility. so it is true to say that it cannot be described as a renewable energy project, because it stores the energy that is produced elsewhere, and that energy may come from non-renewable sources. Maybe compare that against a situation, say for example, where the rest of the grid was all electricity was generated by wind. Then you could maybe say it regenerated electricity from renewable sources, but because some of the rest of the grid is not from renewable energy, then you can't say it's a renewable generator. However, it clearly has a key role to play in allowing those renewable sources to connect to the grid and to make the grid supply more efficient. Bob, anything to add?
Yeah, shall I come in there? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay. Yeah, just to follow on from Ian's point, the overall contribution of pump storage will be to reduce the carbon intensity. So it will be to enable more renewables to replace fossil fuel generation. So it will do this in two ways. It will pump at low demand periods when the base load is nuclear and other renewable sources, because they're the cheapest to operate. So it will allow more of those to operate at minimum times. And at peak times, it will replace the marginal plant, which used to be coal, which is now generally gas-fired plant. So by operating at those two different ends of the demand cycle each day and throughout the year, it will overall allow more renewable generation to operate than would have otherwise been the case. So every megawatt of storage that's available will enable an additional megawatt of renewables, depending on the time of day. So it will average out over a year, but overall there will be a net gain in terms of renewables by having more storage on the system. And that's the main renewable benefit of having it. So it's not a renewable generator itself, but it will importantly enable other renewable generators at times of minimum and maximum demand.
So it has a role in the kind of efficiency of the renewables energy industry in that.
Absolutely. It allows renewables to run more frequently, and without storage, you may be in a situation where the renewables are constrained that they can't run. For example, the power system isn't strong enough to support all the renewables. So it can't create more wind or more sun, but what it can do is allow the renewables that are connected to run to their maximum potential, or help them run to their maximum potential. And also means that more renewables can be connected faster because this type of flexible resource is available. I mean, at the moment, for example, where there's low demand and sort of high winds, there's a lot of renewables that have to be constrained off the power system, particularly in Scotland, because there's a lack of export capacity. So a storage facility will allow more of that to run for longer. So again, it's enabling renewables by adding that flexibility to the power system.
Okay, thank you. Listen, do you want to comment on this particular matter at this stage?
I think the main thing is we've started to broach into question 2, but the short answer, as I understood it, of question 1 is that no, it's not a renewable generator, is what Ian Gillies confirmed. I think I'll comment more when we move on to question 2, because I think Bob started to answer it. Nice link, Bob.
Apologies.
I did say that we'll probably drift in between. They're not discrete areas. I understand that. So that's fine. Okay, moving on to question 2. Is it probably best placed for? Does Mr. Gillies want to add anything at this point, or on that particular question in question 2? So how far can pump storage hydro support the diversification of energy supplies and help balance the supply and demand of electricity? I know Mr. Hull, you've talked through some of this already. Does Mr. Gillies want to say something on that as well?
I think Mr. Gillis probably has got a few things to say, and again, just on the hearing statement, I think it's paragraphs 1.24 to 130, paragraphs 142 to 146, and paragraphs 149 to 154, and paragraphs 171 to 174 are probably the relevant parts of the hearing statement on this. There is also, as far as the position of the applicant and the council are concerned, there's the agreed statement, the statement of agreed matters at paragraphs 2.1.3 to 2.1.7 on this. And I suppose the documents that are relevant are Scottish Government's energy strategy, which is document ILI 2.02, and also the helpful document which was partially funded by the Scottish Government, the benefits of pumped storage hydro, which is document ILI 2.10, and in particular pages 16 to 22. And all these references are set out in the hearing statement. If I then pass over to Gillies on this.
I'm just getting a couple of those documents open, so if Mr. Gillies wants to take me to any of those paragraphs, it'd be helpful to have those in front of me.
Well, I wasn't necessarily going to do that.
Okay, right, that's fine.
Merely to confirm maybe the generality of it. So it's a, and I don't want to repeat, but it's it's principally an electricity storage function. So it's storing electricity when there's more generation than demand. So for example, maybe a windy night time, the demand is low, but potentially generation is very high, and it takes that excess electricity and pumps water to the upper reservoir before turning it back into electricity when it's required, when demand might be greater than supply, or for other grid services. I think, as Bob mentioned there, obviously if there's insufficient storage on the grid and we have excess generation, then those generators have to be constrained off, and that's essentially as lost resource. So I think the assistance to diversification question really comes because it pumped storage allows intermittent generators, and they are mostly renewable generators, to be part of that grid network. And maybe just to note that pumped storage is currently the most widely deployed large-scale electricity storage system globally. Bob, anything to add there?
Yeah, if I can, we've sort of talked about the way it stores energy and enables renewables, but there's another key feature of pumped storage in that it is able to support security of supplies. So what this means is that a generating plant that is able to operate if there is a failure elsewhere and support the balance of the power system. It's not just about energy, it's about things like voltage support, being able to provide reserve quickly. and those services are needed to balance the electricity system. And it's particularly important in Scotland because this type of service can't be provided by wind generators, and it is quite a key feature of having a plant like pump storage that's able to provide these security and stability services that adds additional benefit as well. And we'll come on to some of the detail later in the further questions, but it is an important element in terms of balancing the system. So it adds more than just the energy, it also adds system benefits as well.
Okay, I've noted that, thank you. Ms Henderson, would you like to come in on question 2 now, please?
I just, a couple of things. I think, you know, there's no debate hydro can be used to help balance the grid, but it is the only technology that's out there. So battery technology is coming through, and interconnectors and the European supergrid concept, for example, are other methods that it can be done. And we'll come into in the other questions that it's really about whether or not this hydro power station offers all those benefits and has been designed appropriately to do that. But I think we'll pick that up in questions 3, 4 and 5.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, moving on to question 3 then. We're kind of touching on the demand a bit, and I'm trying to understand, you have mentioned a few aspects there about where the demand will come from. But I suppose I'm thinking in the short term and the long term, and you can define those timescales suitably to me so I can understand how you might think about short and long term. Where essentially will the demand for the proposed facility come from in the short and the long term?
I think this is a question primarily for Mr. Hull to answer. And again, in relation to the hearing statement, I think paragraphs 1.26 to 130, 149 to 154, and 155 to 157 are the relevant paragraphs. There's also obviously the recognition in the MPF3 for the need for this type of development. And in the Scottish Energy Strategy at pages 23 and 58. But if I pass over to Mr. Hull to go into the detail in relation to short and long term.
So there are 3 main areas of demand for pump storage services, and these are services that are available and traded in the electricity markets today by existing pump storage plants. So these are not products and services at some time in the future. They exist today. And the 3 areas are wholesale electricity market. And the way the wholesale electricity market works is that suppliers and generators have to balance their production and supply through contracts or short-term trades, and pump storage can bid in that market either as a demand or as a generator. So it is able to trade in electricity wholesale markets, which is a very liquid market with different timescales. Secondly, it is able to sell short-term system services to the electricity system operator, National Grid. And those are things like backup reserve, the ability to be able to operate at short notice if there's a plant failure, the ability to respond very quickly, if it is a plant failure or equipment failure elsewhere, to provide services like voltage support. Part of one of the features of this type of generator is that it provides essentially megavars to support the voltage in a particular area of the country. So it's able to provide that type of technical service. And those services are products that are bought and sold by the system operator to keep the the power system stable. And then thirdly, there are longer term system services, and that includes services called Black Start, for example, which is the ability to start up without any support from the grid if there is a blackout at any time. Also to operate in lieu of transmission investment. So essentially to provide a long-term network constraint management capability. And the same for voltage support. There are some long-term contracts available for that. And these type of products and services are already in the market today, and they're constantly evolving. And the expectation from the system operator in its forecast is that because there is a greater amount of wind generation and solar that is being connected, less of these system services and balancing services that are available. So this pump storage site will be competing with other generators, other providers of these services, but it has the advantage that it basically provides all of them. So it can participate in several markets. There are also market support systems. There is a capacity market that is run to provide payments to build new capacity, which pump storage can also participate in. But that's not really a traded market. That's really a subsidy or a government support mechanism that these projects can bid for. So in summary, there is a demand for these services at the moment, and recognised markets and products that are available for such an installation to participate in, alongside all the other market participants.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Henderson, do you want to comment on that particular question?
Yeah, and it kind of starts to move into the next question as well, is that as a developer, to be able to finance your project, you need to understand how much you're going to sell onto the bid, and therefore there needs to be an understanding of that supply and demand, and that supply and demand changes depending on what's happening on the grid, which is where the future energy strategy work comes in. And the detail, everything that Mr. Hull said, is fine in very, very general terms, but it's the detail that I'm really struggling to see being presented so far. So maybe those answers will come out a little bit more from the developer and answering the next couple of questions. Black Start capabilities, obviously something that is quite unique. That there's only certain facilities that can provide that. Interconnectors can provide it, is one of the options. There are other types.
Did you interconnect?
Yeah, interconnectors can provide Black Start. Peterhead Power Station used to be the main Black Start for Scotland.
Okay.
So there are other technologies that can provide these services, not just hydro.
Mr. Hull, do you want to comment back on that particular point?
Yes, if I may. So I completely agree that sites like Peterhead Power Station, and there are other resources that can provide Black Start capabilities, but Peterhead Power Station won't necessarily be there in the future. There will come a time when we are decarbonising the gas-fired generation, and unless it fits some sort of abatement mechanism, won't be around and won't be able to provide that type of service. And Black Start capability is important because it has to be local. So unless there's an interconnector that is local to the the demand, it's very difficult then to start up an area. So black start capability for Scotland has to be located somewhere in Scotland, really. And while there are plans for interconnectors, those are not yet in place or funded. So yes, there will absolutely be competition for these type of capabilities. So I don't think we're claiming that this is a unique site for this, but it is a very, very valuable asset, and it will have to compete with all the other resources that are available. But again, being in Scotland is quite important in order to provide that capability in the region.
Okay, thank you. I might move us on to the next question, because I think Ms. Henderson's point is raises a bit more about the detail, and these are really coming to the next kind of questions that I had about the specifics of this project. Then move on to question 4. The assessment talks about a maximum installed generating capacity of 450 megawatts, providing a maximum storage capacity of 2,800 megawatt hours at any one time. That translates into 616 gigawatt hours each year. The statement made that it generates electricity, and I think we've probably touched on this earlier. I just want to get to the bottom of this and understand this. How is the project determined that it generates electricity? You can just explain that to me in kind of layman's terms, so that I can understand that better.
Ma'am, on this, it'd probably be best if Ian Gillis starts off and then Robert Hall comes in. It might be, we were talking about this before we came on, but perhaps question 4 and 5, they're very closely connected.
Yeah.
And rather than sort of saying the same thing in a slightly different way, it might be helpful, and it might also help Ms. Henderson and her sort of point that if we deal with 4 and 5 together, and I think the hearing statement, it's paragraphs 118 to 122 plus paragraph 162, but perhaps if Mr. Gillies starts off with and deals with both questions and your specific question that you asked just there, ma'am.
Yeah, that's fine. I think when I was developing these questions, obviously I was reading through the reports that were produced and various things were popping out. So yeah, happy to take those together if it makes more sense in the answers. Mr. Gillies, do you want to come in?
Surely, thanks very much. So in answer to your basic question, about generation of electricity, so the facility will store electricity generated elsewhere and then regenerate it. So I think that hopefully that answers that particular question. It can't generate it, if you like, by itself. It has to have that electricity generated somewhere else, and it then translates that electricity from electrical energy into kinetic energy. It pumps it up the hill into potential energy. It sits at the top of the hill, back into kinetic energy at the turbine point, and then through the generator produces electricity again. Okay. So hopefully that's. In terms of the output, so the capacity of the project, the instantaneous output is that 450 megawatt figure that you mentioned, and that's the kind of rated output of the turbines. The 2,800 megawatt hours is the storage capacity, and basically if we were to, let's say, empty the head pond in one single output event, then that 2,800 megawatt hours which is stored would produce electricity at 450 megawatts for just over 6 hours. So that's kind of how those figures tie together. If the head pond, the upper storage reservoir, was bigger, then that storage capacity would be greater, and in this case it would produce the 450 megawatts for a longer duration. So that's kind of how that works together.
So can you just run me past that last point again, just so I can write that down clearly? Can you just take me through that last explanation?
Well, I suppose I was really exemplifying why it's 6 hours and not 10 hours, and that duration is determined by the the capacity of that upper reservoir. So if that upper reservoir was bigger, it would allow us to store more water, and essentially it's storing more energy that way. And therefore if it was at the same height, it would produce that 450 megawatts for longer. If, for example, the reservoir was higher, then again that energy, instantaneous energy output, could be greater. But but because it's at a certain level and a certain volume, that's the storage facility, if you like, the equivalent of a battery, then that's what gives us the output.
And how was it determined this kind of scale and mass of the head pond? At what point did you decide that's sufficient, that is a suitable capacity to have the?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, and the way that's kind of determined is generally was two features. One about the suitability of the area to hold a certain capacity, and secondly about the the way the facility is likely to work. And as has been already said, the electricity system is developing quite quickly, so it's very important for us to try and develop a flexible facility, something that allows us to deliver services that Bob Hall mentioned into a developing energy decarbonizing scenario. So it wants to be reasonably flexible, but often these schemes in the past have filled in this gap where there's a peak of demand, quite often in the evening, and that has generally been in the order of 5 or 6 hours. So the combination of two things then in terms of sizing that head pond: one, the suitability of the area for holding a certain volume, and secondly, that we would want to be able to produce energy to cover that nominal peak of somewhere around 6 hours.
Okay, right, I understand that better. Thank you.
In terms of, if I could sort of venture into question 5, I suppose, in terms of the 220 operating cycles, and the 220 operating cycles was was chosen really in the context of trying to get a feel for the carbon impact and other things, just to understand how much electricity might be reasonable to assume was being produced by the facility. And I'm going back to this, as Bob mentioned, in the future we're expecting a number of different operating regimes. But if you like, the most normal operating regime for pump storage is this so-called arbitrage regime, where it basically the facility stores energy when it's most plentiful and least demanded, and releases it when it's most demanded. So in that context, we've assumed that the scheme might work every working day of the year. Now, if you just assumed that was the case, then I think you get about 260 days of the year, or working days. But of course, not every working day is quite the same, and we thought that it may be prudent just to take some of that time off to allow for other events, holidays, maybe less demand in the summertime, and the provision indeed of the sort of services that Bob mentioned that might not allow us to operate in an arbitrage type of way. So, sometimes those services actually require very short-term inputs, support to the grid, but that may prevent you providing this arbitrage service. So, putting it all together, we reduced that, let's say, working assumption of working every working day, one cycle per working day of the year by about 15% to get to 220 cycles per year. And then use that as the basis for working out how much electricity the scheme might release.
But is it possible that that estimate that you've put in there could increase as well as reduce? You said it's a conservative estimate, so it's at the kind of lower end. Do you think it's more likely to increase? The site numbers increase.
Shall I come in on?
Please
on
do,
that?
Bob. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the answer is probably yes, but it depends. Can I just take a step back just for a moment? The sort of daily load profile is very consistent in the UK, in that if you look at sort of each weekday, the morning period from sort of about 9 till 1 is a peak demand period, pretty much all year round. And then in the winter, you then get another peak around 6 p.m., sometimes going on till about 8 p.m. And there it really depends on the time of year as to whether that evening peak is higher than the morning peak, and so on. So you end up with a day that's got two periods of sort of high demand. And if the pump storage is just operating on at peak, so it's operating in a wholesale market arbitrage type mode, then it would just operate at those periods. So you could easily see a situation where it would operate twice a day for periods of around 4 hours. So it would generate in the morning, do some pumping in the afternoon, and then it would generate again over the evening peak. And then basically all overnight, it's got an opportunity to pump again. And that would be pretty typical for every weekday during the year, which is where the 220 comes from. It assumes it just operates for one cycle during that day. It may actually operate for 2 cycles, or it may not. So it probably is a conservative figure. However, because pump storage provides all of these other system services, quite often it is just held in reserve. So it isn't required to generate. It is just required to sit there and not generate. But in case something fails, it can then come in and operate very quickly. So it is very valuable to the power system to have it in reserve. So this is why we've sort of come up with these figure of 220 cycles. We've sort of said, well, maybe it'll be generated for one period and then be held in reserve for the other. And that's a fairly sort of typical operating pattern. So we think that's probably a conservative estimate on the amount of times it runs. But it gives an indication of the type of operating regime for this equipment. And sometimes it's actually, at the moment, it's more valuable when it's pumping. So at a summer period, we're at very low demands at the moment, where there just isn't enough demand for all the low-cost generation that's available. So having it pumping during the day, during the night, is quite valuable. So it's very difficult to say that there's a consistent pattern to this. I mean, we've tried to sort of put all of these factors together and say this is probably a typical cycle for an asset that is designed to run for the 6-hour peak periods, and we think 220 is probably an average number of operating cycles, but it is available to operate every second of every day in the year, and it could have thousands of operating cycles, or low hundreds. So we think we're at the sort of low end of the potential operating cycle spectrum. But from the facilities point of view, it's designed to operate as many times as it's needed, as it's valuable to the power system.
Yeah, I understand it. So it's designed to operate more frequently than that, and could operate more frequently than that, but presumably there are issues in enabling it to work to a greater capacity than that because of the resources that we need to support that, or what's the support?
No, that's correct. As Ian set out, I mean, the 6-hour
Mr. Hull.
operating period is the peak load period during the day. So if it was operating at peak times, generally there would be about 6 hours a day of peak time operation, 4 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening, that it would be expected to operate. But obviously that will vary depending on the generation mix and so on.
Just one thing to pick up there, Bob, I think, is that in response to Claire's point, that the facility can run for a full cycle over 6 hours, or it can run for 6 minutes. It's quite capable of doing both, and we envisage that it will do both in many scenarios.
Okay, right. So yes, I understand. So it's not it's a switch as such. It's a relatively simple thing to enable it to do the 6 hours or any period that's shorter than that. Okay.
Yep.
Right, that's given me quite a lot of information. Ms. Henderson, would you like to come in? There's quite a lot in there you might want to comment on.
Yeah, we finally got to the crux of it. So thanks, gents. I think you've explained the use of electricity in the grid. And when you look at boilers, for example, pump storage hydro, when it was built, that was exactly it. Nuclear ran 24/7. It made more electricity at night than was needed on the grid. They pumped uphill at night, and it was then available for these peaks coming down the hill. And what I'm struggling with is that we're talking about the electricity mix moving more into renewables, and obviously you've got a project that's going to be there for a long time, and therefore the mix of electricity on the grid is also going to change a lot over that time period. And we seem to be sitting here with one set of assumptions that's going to apply for the next 60 years, which doesn't feel right. So my concern is that yes, it can be switched on and off very quickly. And you've got 450 megawatt production capacity, but the storage for 6 hours, and why the storage for 6 hours worth, which dictates the size of the head pond and therefore the knock-on environmental impacts and breach analysis and everything else, is determined by the 6 hours. And I'm struggling to see where you've got 6 hours worth of storage capacity coming from. And I'm actually quite surprised as to how you're going to finance a project without showing exactly how many times this is going to be used, because that's how you're going to make your money. From my perspective, what I'm interested in is how much it's going to be used from a point of view of if it is going to facilitate renewables on the grid, how much is it going to facilitate, which does come back to how many cycles, but I doubt it's going to be full cycles all the time. It's going to be part cycles. The makeup of those cycles is going to change from what it would be if it comes online in 5 years' time to where it's going to be in 50 years' time. The future energy strategy information is all there to allow some of those assumptions to be made and calculated in. It's not clear if you've taken on board at the moment how many times we've got excess wind energy on the grid. It's not clear whether or not the role solar power and community development and local storage is going to take and change the grid as we move forward, and therefore the long-term demand and the number of cycles. So basically, in short, the 220 cycles, I can't say if that's right or wrong, because there's just a load of assumptions going, well, that sounds roughly right. Well, actually, there's a lot more technical information available there, and there's lots of changes that are going to happen in the future. So I personally would have expected that to be modeled to much more detail to give a lot more confidence that the project is going to provide the right benefits, but as Mr. Gillis mentioned, the head pond could be bigger or it could be smaller. And I think that the peaks and the way energy is going to go in the future, then actually you could have a smaller head pond with a 450 generating capacity that could be just as useful to the grid as what is being proposed, and it's not clear where that lies and what work's being done to underpin the assumptions and the design of the project.
Okay, who wants to? There's quite a lot in there, but I think that I think you've picked up on the main issues that Ms. Henderson goes in. Mr. Hall, do you want to come back?
Yeah, if I sort of start. So first of all, you're absolutely right. I would completely agree. The energy mix is going to change. We are sort of moving to a completely different future from where we have been. But one thing is probably more consistent than the generation, which is our demand profile, the way that we use energy, and the predictions for that, and the type of sort of load profile that we're likely to see is there will be a lot of consistency in the way that sort of people use energy in their daily lives. There will be additions to that in the way that we all start to use electric vehicles and electricity for heating and so on. So a lot of those factors are captured in things like the future energy scenarios. But the demand profiles that we've currently forecasting that have peaks in the morning, peaks in the evening, I think the forecasts are really that those are not going to change significantly, and that's the key driver for balancing the system and the 6 hours for the pump storage. It's more the demand side. As on your point about numbers of cycles, the services, the contracts for pump storage are not dependent generally on the number of times it runs. The contracts for services are for it to be available to run as and when needed. So for response and reserve, generally the contracts are an availability payment. So for the commercial aspects of that, yes, it is important to know how many times it will run, but actually, because it is difficult to predict, the way that that is contracted for is through the capacity. So you're absolutely right. You do need to have a view on how that looks, and most estimates is that there will be greater volatility because of the greater renewables on the power system. You won't have the gas plant, the flexible gas plant that exists today. And National Grid, in its future energy scenarios, forecasts a huge increase in the requirements for storage through to 2050. And there's a question on that later. So, I mean, I won't go into details now, but the system operator identifies a very significant increase in the amount of storage to compensate for gas generation and so on that isn't going to be included. So the number of cycles is important, but not necessarily from a revenue point of view. It's important that the plant can operate, but there is a much bigger demand for storage forecast in the future. And indeed, the greater flexibility that can be offered by pump storage and the amount of capacity that's there will enable it to meet that particular need.
Ms. Henderson?
Yeah, I'm just conscious that we're using the word capacity, and there's two different things there. There's generation capacity and storage capacity, and they mean two very different things. And my question is whether or not the storage capacity has been appropriately sized. So to have black start, you don't necessarily need 6 hours worth of storage capacity. What you need is the 400 megawatts of generation capacity. So I still ask the question whether or not the head pond is being appropriately sized. And I get what we're saying about peaks and demand, but I think the time frames that you've given for morning and afternoon don't quite add up to, or neither of them are 6 hours, they're both 4 hours. So 4 hours worth of storage would be appropriate. But we've also got the point of, because renewables are intermittent, just because we've got a peak in the evening doesn't mean to say we don't already have that on the grid. with the fact that at the moment, as you say, we've got excess wind to meet demand if it's all windy. So if it's windy at tea time, you wouldn't be using the storage, the pump storage to regenerate, use Mr. Gilly's terminologies, electricity at that point. So it is a very, very complex picture. And I'm not convinced I'm understanding your painting of that picture. Getting into a bit of an analogy there, apologies. But yeah, just that kind of the difference between generating capacity and storage capacity, and what that really means.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just hear more on.
Shall I just come back? Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine, Mr. Hall. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I would sort of go back to the three demands for pump storage, because I think we're sort of focusing on one at the moment, which is the wholesale market and how it might participate in that. But there are two other big services that are provided, and the system services that are provided by pump storage are probably more important in the future than the actual energy that it might generate in a particular day. And the scale of frequency response and support and the periods of time that that's required for is as important as the duration that it's running for. And it's the provision of that amount of capacity has to be linked to a sufficient amount of energy, if I can put it that way, because I think that's your point, that if you don't have the head pond, the amount of energy reserve sized sufficiently to allow an operating period of the 6 hours, then it really doesn't allow the facility to provide the services that it is required, both for the power system and to provide all of the ancillary services support that is required. So the two are really linked. If you can't sort of provide one without the other. I don't know if that helps or confuses.
Well, I think, Bob, I was just going to make the point that you know, I think the very important point here is one about designing a flexible, you know, a flexible facility, one that can both react to the changes I think we all agree are coming, you know, as well as what we can see at the present. So, you know, maybe just think that would, you know, the emphasis there. Although I would note that, you know, I think I did say in my starting explanation there that, you know, we did consider the size of the storage, the head pond in the local context. So I don't know if Catherine, you would want to make a point on that.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, just to note that we have actually investigated that as part of our further environmental information, which was submitted back in April 2019. So that's ILI reference 13.0.01. And in section 4 of the FEI, we do actually go into detail around the material balance of the head pond in terms of its size. And it was concluded and accepted that the as submitted design of the head pond is the most sustainable, because every other option in terms of head pond size would actually exacerbate and create further magnitude of significant adverse effects. And that's shown in the tables within section 4.
And there are a number of parties involved in that at that consultation stage, in that I understand. A number of iterations in the design as a result of that. Yeah.
Yes. So the FEI contained the conclusions of the alternatives, which was requested by Highland Council, but also the landscape works we did on the head pond inlet outlet structure. So the contouring, the removal of the skylining, And that was one of the reasons then during the conversations and dialogue we had with the Highland Council Landscape Officer that led them then to be satisfied with the design. But in terms of Mrs. Henderson's query around the investigation of the head pond and the material balance and the storage capacity, that was actually included in section 4.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Henderson, do you want to come back in there, please?
Apologies, I'm just trying to find that document because I've not seen it.
Yeah, I can give you a minute to find that if that's helpful.
I'm not going to be able to find it anyway, so I'm not going to be able to respond and comment to what's just been said. But it'd be interesting to know whether or not that was taken to. They redid the breach analysis on smaller volumes as well, but it might have affected site, and there's lots of other things that are in there. Regarding the 6 hours, it's really going back to a point from Mr. Hull, was you mentioned the system capacity, and yeah, I understand that you can't have 450 megawatts for 2 minutes because that's not going to provide what you need. The 6 hours, is that something that specifically comes from National Grid as a minimum requirement for you to have to be able to provide that service? Because it's kind of what you said was we need to have some capacity in there for a period of time, obviously. So a certain ability to regenerate electricity for an amount of time and a number of megawatts. And then you've jumped to being that 6 hours, but I don't understand where that 6 hours is coming from. Is that coming from National Grid, or is that a number that you've come up with yourselves, or is it a minimum of an hour? And to allow you to do that, actually, you need your 4 hours for dealing with tea time and an hour on top, so you've always got an hour in the pond.
Well, could you answer that specific point?
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, there's not a requirement specifically from National Grid because they contract for these projects. However, there is a standard that's set in the capacity market for pump storage projects, which requires medium-term storage to be beyond 4 hours. The system operator is looking for longer periods than that. So there have been tenders run for 6 to 8 hours, I believe. So, but the only sort of benchmark that I'm aware of is the 4 hours that's set for the capacity market, which is medium-term storage. I'm not aware, unless Ian is, of any other benchmarks that have been set to define different storage durations.
Not specific benchmarks, but I think it's worth pointing out that the project may be called to deliver a reduced level of output for longer periods. So you can see, or you can envisage in a future scenario where we're maybe taking more power from large wind developments, that if in a CAM scenario, for example, let's say if one wind farm drops out, then maybe the project might actually be required to provide, let's say, 150 megawatts, but for 18 hours, which it can do. So I think it's maybe slightly not the right way to exactly to look at it, to say, well, this is 6 hours. It just happens that the 6 hours is the capacity we can deliver it, the duration we can deliver at full capacity. But actually understanding that we have to have a reasonably flexible facility here that can operate in a number of different ways for multiple durations.
I'm just trying to get to Ms. Henderson's point about the 6 hours that has been determined, just so we can just really kind of get to that, understand that. And you talked about a 9 to 1 p.m. peak, generally all year round, in that other kind of winter peak of you said between 5 and 6 p.m, but kind of running it to probably 8 p.m. Is that how you've ended up with the 6 hours? Is that where that's coming in, or am I misunderstanding that?
Shall I go on that? Yeah, so I wouldn't like to say that you've got a specific 4 and 2 hour period all year round, because it varies. Yeah. And it is a period where you've got in some days of the years it runs from 7 o'clock in the morning till 1 in the afternoon, so you've got a 6 hour period there. Sometimes the evening peak runs through from 5 through to 9 o'clock. So I was really trying to give you an example of the type of daily load profile, rather than say that this is the capacity that fits around it. The way that, perhaps a better way of looking at it, is the way that the grid operator looks at it, in that it wants capacity that it can run for a significant period of time, and generally greater than 4 hours, that is available for. And having it available for 6 hours means that it's comfortably available to run for that longer period that the grid operator is looking for. So I think it is at the end of the day, it is a balance, as Ian said, between the amount of storage capacity and the generation output that you have. And having the right balance between those two is ultimately a judgment. It's trying to identify what is most valuable to the system operator. We know it's potentially could be 18 hours, it could be 6 hours. So we've sized according to a 6 hour period, but as Ian says, it could be for a longer period in the future when wind generation isn't running, for example. And the key to it is the storage capacity and being able to use that in a flexible way. So yes, one element of the sizing is what are the daily peaks, when might it be useful for that, but it's not the only one.
I understand the variability of what you're looking at. Ms. Henderson, do you want to come in any further on that point before I move on to the final question under this heading?
I don't think so, but we seem to have almost ended up in 2 different things to some extent, is because we've got the little bit about how much storage capacity you have, and then also the cycle thing, and the cycle thing has a knock-on implication to the carbon. But I think we're going to pick that up later, because to some extent the arguments that are being made there is that 6 hours is required so that the system generator has what they want when they need it, and the 220 cycles is a different part to that, and how much it'll be used, and there's kind of a lot of assumptions being made, and the question is really whether or not, I suppose to some extent, it's about how the developer gets paid, and sometimes it can be paid for doing nothing, which is paid for having that storage sat there full and not being used. The developers effectively saying they'll still be paid for that because they're providing the service backup system, which is just how the grid works, which is fair enough. You're not going to not make the money because you can do that. However, that then goes against whether or not you're going to really use 220 operational cycles and the carbon claims that have been made. But I think we'll pick that up in the next session.
Okay. Yeah. I can see the point you're making. Yeah, if that's dipping into the carbon calculator aspect and the impact, we'll touch on that. Just moving on to question 6. To what extent could the project be considered a net user of electricity? This is just something I want to understand as well, about this balance between, what might be generated, used, but also, what might be used in the processing of that. Mr. Hall, Mr. Gillis, I'm not sure who's suitable here. Mr. Armstrong, who's best to come in on question 6?
I think Mr. Gillis first, and mainly I think Mr. Gillis, and I think the relevant bits of the hearing statement is paragraph 171, and also probably of some use is the further comments on the written submissions, which is document ILI 1609 and paragraph 115, and I suppose the Scottish Government's guidance of 2013, which is ILI 205, and the 5th page of that. But if I pass over to Mr. please.
Thank you. I dare say, like all forms of energy conversion, there tends to be some efficiency loss when you convert from one type of energy to another. But I suppose to note that pump storage is a well-established storage technique and used very widely globally because it is reasonably efficiently able to store large forms of energy. The efficiency of energy conversion technologies is improving, and I know Ms. Henderson talked about battery storage, and batteries are also improving in their efficiency, but the efficiency we have assumed for this facility is 80%, so 20% of the electricity coming into the facility to be used for pumping, you don't get back when you regenerate that energy later. So I think that's the kind of short answer. I suppose just maybe one ancillary point to make about whether it's a net user or not, and maybe not in terms of the facility itself, but in the context of the grid. Clearly, if you are unable to store excess electricity on the grid, then that excess would be effectively lost because it would be constrained off. So for the grid as a whole, I would argue it's a positive thing to be able to store it. But when you get to the facility itself, then obviously that energy conversion, something is lost.
Okay, I understand. Mm-hmm. Ms. Henderson, do you have any questions on that one?
Yeah, I think the 80% is a pretty well understood number. If you look at operational pump storage hydro, then that's kind of the figure they quote. My only question, I suppose, is that if we're doing, and I don't think it will make a big difference, but I'm just going to ask the question anyway, if you've got lots of smaller cycles, so you're running for 10 minutes uphill, 5 minutes downhill type thing, as opposed to 6 hours up, 6 hours down, does that have any impact on efficiency? I would hope not, when it only runs at 80% in the first place, but just to ask the technical question.
Well, I would, sorry, beg your pardon, Claire.
That's okay, no, it's fine. I'm just going to direct that question to you, Mr. Gillis. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, I mean, I think, if you don't mind picking up on Fiona's point there, that 80% is quite efficient in electricity storage systems, but there are no further losses. It's kind of instantaneous loss, if you like. It's not cumulative loss. So 80% is pretty good across all operating regimes for the facility.
Okay. Right, we've reached the end of the first section. Just looking at the time, 25 to. I'm happy to carry on for a little bit longer yet if everybody's feeling okay. Are you happy to continue? Does anybody want a short break at this stage? Hands up if you want a short break.
2 minutes would be nice.
2 minutes is perfectly okay. What we'll do, we'll just leave this as it is. We'll not break out at this stage because it means getting everybody connected in. So we'll just take 2 minutes. If we could just be back, because I look at the time now, my clock isn't in. Yes, it's 11:34. We'll just be back in at about 11:37, 38. Just literally, 3 or 4 minutes, if that's all right. Give us time to have a toilet break and grab a drink. Okay, thank you. Are you recording again?
Yep, I've just started recording.
Great, thank you. Right, well, we shall resume. So yeah, I put a heading of carbon impact because this was quite an interesting topic in terms of understanding, and for my benefit, certainly for the Minister to understand, we're dealing with a project, does it require to have a carbon calculator, impact calculator on it or not? Is that assessment made? Is it normal practice to do that? But also just generally understanding the carbon impact of the project overall relative, and it's about that balancing of the factors that I will need to look at to make my recommendations to the Minister. So the first question I have is around the policy requirements, really, for any kind of carbon impact calculator. Are there for these kind of projects? What are we talking about? And I'll direct that obviously at the applicant first, please. Mr. Armstrong.
Yes, thanks. I think this question and the next question will be Ian Gillis that's answering it. And the relevant part of the hearing statement, paragraph 158 to 160, obviously, I suppose the starting point is that neither Highland Council, SNH or SEPA suggested that there should be a carbon calculation, but the applicant has carried that out, and it is, we think, at the end of the day, quite useful for the UMAM and the Scottish ministers, and on that basis, I'll pass over to.
Can I just check? So that's in the that's where is that set out?
Paragraphs 158 to paragraph 160 of the hearing statement, I think, is the.
Yeah, sorry, that's been set out in the hearing statement, right? It wasn't done prior to this particular, inquiry and hearing process. Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Gillies.
Well, on this particular point, actually, I don't have much to add to what Douglas has just said. I mean, except to say that we are, I dare say, pump storage projects are fairly rare things, but we're not aware of any requirement to set out a carbon impact calculator. However, we obviously have, as you just pointed out, set one out in our statement in good faith to try and answer the point that was being raised. We are aware of carbon assessments in other types of projects, for example, in wind farm projects where the loss of peat is a particular issue, which has resulted in the Scottish Government producing guidance and indeed a tool for that assessment. That's not directly applicable to the establishment of a carbon calculation for pump storage as such, but there is an element of peatland associated with the development, and we have used that particular tool as a basis for establishing an estimate in the context of peat for that element. However, for the other elements of the project, we've used a slightly different methodology.
What method have you used, and what have you based that on?
Well, I think that actually, maybe comes into some of the question lower down. But basically, what we've done there is we've taken the various elements of the project, and we would always do this in the design of a project. We'd identify the various components of the project, for costing and other reasons. So it's very heavily broken down into other things, and we're able to ascribe a carbon cost to those things. And so we've broken the project into all its constituent elements, ascribed a carbon cost by the quantity of that element, and then aggregated that to get an overall figure.
Okay. Ms. Henderson, do you have any particular point to raise regarding the kind of policy requirement?
Yeah, I think the main thing for me, and the reason that I asked for carbon calculations way back at the public consultation side, because I thought it was essential for a project that was claiming to benefit global warming and make claims against the policies from a carbon perspective, that it could actually back that up in quantitative terms. So that was why I'd asked for that way back in when I met Catherine. Catherine will tell you the date of the public consultation at the PAC event. And I specifically had the discussion with Catherine at that point, that, you know, the carbon balance of this would be very interesting. So basically the applicants made a claim that it's contributing towards global warming benefits and carbon benefits. And without the maths to back that, I don't understand how we can make those claims. So from a point of view of carbon costs, and I laid it in my response, the carbon cost is, as Mr. Gillies has explained, you look at the materials that are going to be utilised, so carbon cost associated with concrete, with steel, with various other elements that will be used in the project. And then there's also the carbon cost of disturbing peat, which, to be honest, is probably a lesser element in this instance because it's a major construction project. So you've also got to look at how many, you've got 5 years worth of diggers on site. Now, how much fuel do they use? How much carbon is associated with that? So there is a carbon cost associated with construction. Now, there's been a figure provided for that. It's unclear how that figure has been calculated and what's been submitted. I'm guessing someone has sat down with a calculator and looked at the main elements, but that's not been provided, so I don't know how that's underpinned. So you vanished. That's better.
Sorry.
And then from an operational perspective, we're talking about a 20% loss in electricity by running the plant. So there must be a carbon cost associated with that. If we assume that it's not going to be purely renewables that's utilised to put electricity up the grid, up the hill, because there's non-renewable sources on the grid currently, and that will change with time. And how many times it's used, which comes back to the 220 cycle. And then obviously you've got decommissioning costs on top of that. Now, the offset of all those carbon costs of construction and physical operation of the plant needs to be the amount of renewables that are facilitated onto the grid. And that's the bit that I'm struggling to understand, how that's been calculated to come out with a carbon balance to say that it's going to save carbon, and how the quantum that it's going to save carbon by.
Okay, yeah. I mean, all of this is wrapped up generally in the questions that I've put, but I'm happy to just take that point as raised because it's kind of a useful summary. Mr. Gillies, are you coming in on that?
Yes, which particular point did you want me to answer?
Right, okay. A few points raised there. I think if we're looking at, let's start with the efficiency side of this. And how that kind of feeds in.
Surely.
Yeah.
Maybe just to preface my, point on that. I mean, I think the general point here is because there was, this is just my own opinion on this, but the reason this wasn't requested by the statutory consultees was because of the alignment of the project with policy. And there was a general assumption, I think, that because it was so aligned with the decarbonisation policy, that this particular question wasn't asked for further detail. However, pleased to provide it. With regard to the efficiency question, I think so that has been included in our evidence statement. So what we've done there is we've taken the 80% round trip efficiency that we discussed before,
Mm-hmm.
taking that 20% that is used in that process, and we have ascribed a grid carbon factor to that from now through the project's lifespan, and by multiplying those two things together, have got a figure for that, which we have included in our evidence statement. And the figure that you'll find in there is 750,000 tons over the project lifespan. So that's 7,500 tons a year.
Perhaps just to assist, I think we're effectively started with question 11 here on efficiency, and it's probably paragraph 1.68 of the hearing statement that sets out the basis of the calculation and what Ian's just been going through.
Okay, I'm conscious that Ms. Henderson has raised. She's basically trying to understand the whole picture. This is the what's been weighed up on one side. What are the overall costs that have been taken account of, and what's the kind of net result of that? What we're ending up with. So I think just to try and get through all of that in kind of maybe a logical way, rather than try and present you with all that in one go, we'll work through the questions which I've devised to try and get to the nub of that point. And some of the points that have been raised, I mean, the point raised by Ms. Henderson was, well, how have you taken account of these costs for, have you taken account of the costs of machines working at all times of the day over the construction period of 6 years? Is that all built into these figures? And where is it in your statement that that's covered?
Yes, thank you. So that is built into our statement. Let me just check where exactly it is. So I think 1.68 is where you find that information.
It talks about, I think they talk about an estimate of 1 million tonnes. We're looking at question 10 here. That's 1 million tonnes carbon dioxide equivalent.
168 is dealing with the efficiency point. 167, I think deals with.
Sorry, yeah.
167, yeah. Okay. So just can understand this. You're looking at, looked over a 100-year lifetime of the project. So it's operational lifetime plus the construction phase, all of that put together. And that's how I've devised the questions, that we can kind of work through that. And there's a number of assumptions that have been taken along the way, along that route, which I suppose is what we're trying to understand. So just taking the point about, and I'll work through the questions because it makes it easier, I think. 230,000 tonnes, 23 million tonnes over a 100-year lifetime has been calculated. How far can it be assumed that development will use power generated from non-fossil sources? Because there is a suggestion there that that it's using a range of non-fossil sources, but for how long, and I think that's the point that's made by Ms. Henderson as well, in just one of her.
Yes. So yeah. So so going back to maybe the answer to an earlier question, you know, the requirement for storage is and good balancing already exists, and to some large extent, that function at the moment is provided by gas-fired generation, which can in many respects fulfill the grid balancing function that is required. So in providing an alternative way of doing that, then we are displacing that gas function. Now, in displacing the gas function, there is an assumption in here that displacement will be displaced by renewable energy. And the reason for that is that it's new renewables that are coming onto the grid as part of the decarbonisation process, and therefore when we displace that gas function, which is the the current is currently used for that, then we'll be doing that with essentially renewable sources.
Okay, so you're making assumptions about future transition to much more renewable resources that are going to come forward, and that's been taken account of in that quantifiable. How have you come up with that figure?
So yes, the figure is dependent upon the, as already discussed, on the the 220 cycles assumption,
Okay.
and that gives us an amount of generation, an assumed amount of generation, which we are using to displace that gas grid balancing function.
In what proportions? I mean, how are you? I'm not quite understanding that. I understand the concept, but I'm not sure how I understand. How.
So the assumption is that in displacing the grid balancing function with gas from gas, then you essentially save the carbon impact from that gas. And so what we do is we take the grid carbon factor associated with gas generation, which is this 0.372 kilograms, but of that figure, and then we multiply that by the total assumed generation to get a carbon saving. So we're taking that gas out of it, we're providing it from storage, which is essentially from renewable energy, and therefore displacing that amount of carbon.
Okay. Ms. Anderson, do you want to comment on that particular, rather than take this, let's take this step by step so we can understand the different elements, if that's okay.
So from my perspective, we're displacing the gas. So basically what we're saying is instead of gas balancing out the grid, we're going to use the hydro, and therefore that's where the saving comes from. I can understand that assumption. However, that's the current baseline and won't be the baseline in the future. Alternatively, you could have excess wind generation capacity to offset. You could have nuclear to offset and various other technologies to offset. So it's an assumption. It's one way to do those numbers. And leading into the next question is if we're taking the credit for offsetting all of that gas, I don't then understand how you can also claim the savings of renewables, because what you're doing in the first place is saving the gas. How can you then save the renewables as well? So you can have one or the other, you can't have both, is my view on it. So I do understand the assumption. So you've taken the 616 or whatever it is gigawatts on the assumption of 220 cycles. So I'm not saying I agree with 220 cycles, but all the maths is done based on that. So let's understand that that's what we're working with. So it's the 220 times 616 gives you the 616 gigawatt hours, and you're multiplying that by the 0.372 kilograms of CO2, which is where you come up with the 230 tons of CO2. So it is making an assumption that if this hydro didn't come on board, we would continue to operate a gas-fired power station for 100 years, which isn't the way the market's going. You would be using batteries, you'd be using interconnectors and such like in the future. So I think it's a generous assumption for your calculation. There you go.
Bob, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, so I think there is a huge need for flexibility in the future, and while there are alternative options, that they are each in their own way limited. So interconnectors basically face the same environment as we do in the UK. So if the wind isn't blowing in the UK, then it may not be blowing in France or well, perhaps not France, in Northern Europe and so on. So that there is not necessarily, while interconnectors can help you, you can't sort of guarantee that that's going to fill the mix. So it is what is very clear is there's going to be a huge transformation with the amount of gas and fossil fuels disappearing, and the forecasts from National Grid's future energy scenarios are that there's going to need to be a lot more interconnector capacity, there's going to be a lot more storage capacity, and there's going to have to be a lot more renewables. And the one thing that is disappearing from the energy mix is gas. So while all of these other options are still available, there is still a huge gap to fill, as all of the gas plant has to be replaced by 2050. So I don't think it's an either or. It's all of these things are contributing to decarbonisation, including pump storage.
Ms. Henderson?
I don't disagree with what you're saying. It's how that's taken on board in your calculations. So there's an assumption in the calculations that you're displacing gas, and that in 100, in 50 years' time, it's still gas you're displacing and not something else. It's an assumption you've made for a calculation, and I understand why that's being done. I'm just saying it's an interesting assumption. You had to make some assumption.
Anybody else want to come in at that point? Anything further?
Ma'am, I think just for completeness, that dealing with this question specifically, the hearing statement, it's at paragraph 1.63 to 1.64, really sets out the calculation and the assumptions. And for the next question 9 that we're coming on to, it would be the hearing statement at 165.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to question 5, and there's a number of scenarios that are looked at. The scenario of, I think it's called 2 degrees. I don't know very much about the scenarios that are looked at, but that particular scenario has been chosen, and I want an explanation of why that is. But just an idea of what the outcome of using the other scenarios that are set out in the future energy scenarios as well. That is there another alternative that you can look at, and what difference does that make? So I'm not sure if it's Mr. Hull or Mr. Gillies on that one.
So I'll certainly try and go first there, if that's okay. With respect to the use of the future energy scenarios document in the round, clearly we want to use something that was publicly available, and this document specifically designed to try and look ahead to how our energy requirements are dealt with in the future. So it's a good reference. And in the 2019 version of this thing, which they produce every year, there are 4 scenarios described, 2 which meet the 2050 decarbonisation target, and 2 that don't. We elected to use one of the 2 that meets the target, given that the policy objectives that we are supporting with the development has that as its objective, I suppose. And then secondly, because actually the information contained in the future energy scenarios document does allow us a kind of direct correlation between initial generation and amount of storage required to support that renewable generation. So there's quite a clear link between the 2. So that was really the reason that we used that one. The other scenario, which also achieves the decarbonisation target in 2050, the community energy, community renewable scenario, there is a different mix there. There's not quite such an easy link to spot between storage and renewable generation, because in that scenario, there is more what we call distribution system connected storage and generation. So that was really the reason for using one rather than the other there. I think the other point though to note is that in that community renewable scenario, there's actually an even greater requirement for storage, but it's not clear, you know, as that document is written, just exactly where that storage is going to come from. So the best linkage was in that 2 degrees scenario. But in order just to answer your question about, you know, what would happen in the other scenarios, we did look at one of the, let's say, the non-policy achieving scenarios, and again, where the information in the document is, you know, draws a you know, has a direct quantifiable number for additional renewables and additional storage. And in fact, if you do the same exercise with that scenario, actually you end up with a very similar figure. And the reason for that, of course, is that the amount of required storage is actually directly proportional to the amount of grid scale renewables that's attached to it. You know, so the one is in direct correlation with the other, so that the more renewables you have, the more storage you have. So we're able to draw basically the same conclusion from that scenario as the chosen scenario, in as much that roughly, you know, the carbon effectively saved, the 22 million tons figure we talk about over the 100 years, is approximately the same in both those scenarios, i.e. a scenario that meets the decarbonisation policy objective and one that doesn't. And that's because the amount of storage is linked to the amount of renewables that you have connected to the grid. And when I say grid, I suppose I should just clarify that generally speaking, we're talking about the transmission network here as opposed to the distribution network. And pump storage is primarily a creature, if you like, that serves the transmission network. Anything to add on that one, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, if I can just sort of add the other point to make, and we put this in our statement, is that the 2019 future energy scenarios were based on a target of 80% decarbonisation. So they were produced before the net zero targets were set in legislation. So the 2020 FES has just been published, and that includes 3 scenarios that meet the new net zero target. So it goes far beyond what is currently set. They still have one scenario that doesn't meet the 2050 targets, slow progression scenario. So, but I think as Ian's highlighted, I mean, we've tried to take the 2 degrees scenario, which still shows a very significant need for storage. The updated numbers show more scenarios with an even greater need for storage, but obviously that came out before, after we'd made this submission. So it is recently published information.
Is that a document before the hearing?
That isn't a document that's before the hearing because it wasn't published in the time that documents had to go in, but it is now in the public domain. And if you thought it was helpful, it could be produced. The FES 2019 is obviously before the hearing, and it's document ILI 212, and it just to to mark up where the relevant pages are, setting out the scenarios, and the policy compliant scenarios are pages 16 to 23. There's an explanation of that, but perhaps page 133 is one of the most useful pages because it sets out in text and also in figure 511 the requirements for storage capacity through each one of the scenarios, and shows how much is actually required over the next 30 years in graphic form, and the really essentially massive requirement for these types of facilities if the policy compliant scenarios are to be met.
Okay, that's useful. Thank you. I've got that in front of me. Figure 511, yeah, on page 133. Yeah. I think I appreciate the assessment's been done based on the 2 degree scenario, and that was what was published. But I think it would be good for the hearing, and even if you want to refer to it in closing statements, the new document that's been published. I appreciate it was very, very recently published. Okay, Ms. Henderson, do you want to come in on the scenarios issue?
Yeah, the point of view of the scenarios, I understand the argument for using the 2 degree scenario, the steady state and consumer evolution scenarios, although probably all of us hope that doesn't happen because it contributes towards global warming and not meeting the targets. And I'm talking about 2019 one because that's what we've got in front of us. It is normal for projects to consider all scenarios because they are credible scenarios. So I would have expected the calcs to be done on all 4 to provide a range number as an output, as opposed to having done it on 1 scenario and basing it on that. It's useful to see the range. So if we're going to do it in the 2020 document, which seems to make sense because that's now the credible scenarios, it'd be nice to see the range, depending on which scenario actually happens, because unfortunately none of us are in control of what scenario will happen. My other comment, and I'm guessing there is a similar scenario in 2020 and the community renewable scenario, yes, it requires a lot more storage, but as you say, it's not entirely clear where that'll come from. My assumption is because it would be community-based power-led, it's likely to be local storage in terms of whether that's batteries or off-grid solutions. So I think that one's interesting to see how that interprets against having, as you say, something on the generation side of the grid.
Okay. Anybody else want to come in again at that point before I move on to the next question? Okay.
Well, Claire, sorry, I was just going to maybe clarify that the reason we didn't do that was that there's not a direct linkage in that future energy scenarios document between the amount of grid connection storage and renewable. So we can make further assumptions there, but I think I didn't want to put assumptions on top of other assumptions. So I think that would actually be quite difficult to do. And the backup data that is provided with the Future Energy Scenarios report doesn't allow us to do that, because we did look at it. So, that of itself, I don't think is necessarily terribly helpful.
Okay, I understand your position. Okay, I'm going to move us on to the next question, and I would like to look at the next question, which is, I think we touched on it earlier about the negative emissions attributable to the construction and operation for stage and facility. I suppose it's just really trying to understand how reliable the estimates, and I appreciate you've got to make estimates. I suppose it's just for my understanding and for that of the Minister is what have you based that on? And is there any comparators that can be made to allow me to understand how realistic those estimates are? Also, whether they're regarded as a maximum? Okay, so who's best placed for that one?
So that'll be me again then.
Okay.
So in respect of the just taking maybe your last point first, if you don't mind, the maximum or reliable point. I think it is fair to say that there, is still quite a lot of discussion about, how we calculate these things and methodology and whatnot. So we've used, published figures wherever possible, or industry recognized sources wherever we can. And if we haven't got those, then something analogous to them. So we believe we have a good estimate. We also did a bit of sensitivity assessment. Could one is it dependent on one factor rather than the other? And that all went into the to the creation of this figure. And indeed, we were conservative, actually, I would just say, in a lot of those assumptions. And partly we were conservative because, in a way, we didn't feel that when we put this together, that and the whole assessment, that it materially impacted the overall balance of the thing. So I wondered if it might be just useful for me just to sort of summarize those things together, because I'm aware that in our statement, they're not all summarized. So I just thought it might be useful just to compare. So for example, on the specific issue of the construction impact, we've derived a figure of 400,000 tons, which occurs over the construction period, the full construction period. We've included this efficiency impact of 750,000 tons. And that's the 80%, 20% thing we talked about before. And then we've also added an operational impact over the lifetime of the project, just to account for, maintenance, repair, replacement of equipment, that sort of thing, of 250,000 tons. And bringing all that together, so let's say our total carbon impact is something little over 1.4 million tons over the lifespan, which we've taken to be 100 years. And then if you like, our mitigators, if you like, that's the balancing services and the renewables deployment. You'll note we've estimated, and we recognize it as an estimate, as previously pointed out, of 23 million tons and 22 million tons respectively. So we have a figure of impact, if you like, of 1.4 million tons against a savings of something like 45 million tons. So I think that in that context, we had to be sort of realistic about the accuracy with which we were estimating the carbon impacts, the construction impacts. So we have been reasonably conservative in doing those. So I think in answer to your direct question about whether we can regard it as a worst case, then I would like to think we can, particularly when we haven't yet explored or included in those numbers any mitigating factors like the use of electrically powered plant, or in very short order the availability of hydrogen powered plant, which is actively being either deployed at the moment in the case of electric plant, or will be available to the construction industry. We estimate in less than 2 years' time on the hydrogen plant side. So, and a lot of the construction related impacts come from the use of plant and construction plants. So those are two mitigators that will be coming forward. We haven't included those, so we do regard our estimate as reasonably conservative. With respect to just how the construction impacts were put together, as I mentioned in the kind of the opening part of our discussion here, the whole project was broken down into its constituent parts, and how those parts were put together. So access roads, utilities, diversions, temporary structures, permanent structures, pieces of equipment. and all the carbon impacts associated with either the manufacturing process or the construction process, the concrete that went into it, the labour force coming to the site, etc., was all included within there, with each of those items being given a carbon weight, a score, if you like, and then multiply by the number of trips or the amount of concrete or whatever to aggregate it all up to that figure.
Is the detail of that available, and where can we see that detail?
Well, we haven't listed, as Ms. Henderson has pointed out, all that detail in our statement. There's a lot of it, so we've just summarised it only.
Okay.
But I think maybe the point I would just seek to make there again is that even if we hadn't been conservative and maybe had, let's say, we even doubled our construction impact, I don't think that would materially impacted the overall balance of the project in terms of its net benefit on carbon.
Okay. And the reason you haven't given the detailed information, just you feel it was just too much detail to put as a background report, or why has the detail not been provided?
Well, yes, I think exactly that. It's a very big spreadsheet with with lots of numbers on it, and but I dare say if you were interested in the sort of summary of that, let's say broken down into the sort of segments, then that could relatively easily be provided.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a kind of interim kind of explanation, as you say, that can take that the raw data, let's say, that's been then used and analysed, and the analysis of that presented in some way. It's just to really give me as much information as possible to understand what you've taken into account. The summary you've given is useful, but it is the kind of eventual figures that you've arrived at, and it's what's underpinning all of those that just gives that evidence a bit more weight, I would have thought. So it may be that'd be something that would be useful to provide.
Ma'am, that could be something. I mean, obviously, the summary is set out paragraphs 167 through to 170 of the hearing statement. But if you felt it would be helpful, we could produce some slightly more detailed information. But the figures have been taken from sort of standard documents for calculation of these figures. But if you would like that can be made available.
Okay, I'm just going to ask Ms. Henderson at this stage. Does that give you a reasonable understanding of how the applicant has arrived at some of the calculations?
Well, I know exactly how you do the calculations because I do them for a living. So I understand exactly what they've done, and that's kind of why I've asked for the details, because I can't see what they've done to come up with the numbers. So understand the process exactly. What's not clear is, for example, what is and isn't in the calculation, because we don't have the line items that have gone into it. And so basically you multiply, say it's X tons of concrete, you then multiply that by a carbon factor, and what sources of data have they used for those carbon factors. So to some extent, not saying that I wouldn't want to see the underpinning spreadsheet, and I'm sure it's an absolute nightmare because these things are when you put them together, but there'll be set sources that they'll have used their baseline information from, and it'd be useful to at least have those references and potentially the high level assumptions. We don't necessarily need how much aggregate is associated with each component of the project, but there must be aggregates associated with multiple bits. Can we add them together and have a summary table, just to get a feel for it? So I kind of agree with you saying that having an interim level summary would be useful. It's not a difficult process to do. I agree there's a lot of detail in there, but we need to get an understanding of the main portions of the detail being incorporated. So for example, have we got all the materials in there? Have we got all the transport in there? Have we got the staff coming to site? Have we got the movements on site? Now, from what is being said, it sounds like it is, but I haven't got any evidence to underpin that. So
yeah, I think it's a useful point. It was what I was kind of getting at, really. I think we've got a very much a summary in the hearing statement, which is totally appropriate for a hearing statement. But it's and I appreciate there's a lot of detail that's sitting in all the spreadsheets. I'm not expecting them to be private. Something that sits between the two, that just brings in what are the sources, what are the resources and references that have been used, and how have they, just so we can see if there's anything that we'd expect to see to be covered, and I think that evidence will be quite important. I'm happy to see that again submitted as part of a closing statement, and it can accompany that. Does that sound reasonable?
I mean, just for what it's worth, you know, we can produce something like that, which has all the the components of it with their respective. Sorry. So just to give you a feel for what might come forward, and that was the various components of the scheme, the proportion of which you made up that total figure, and we can summarise those.
Okay, well let's start with that. If I feel that I need something, I can always ask for further written submissions. If I feel I need just a little bit of another layer of detail perhaps behind that, but we can let's get that put in. I'm just wondering, actually, rather than submit that as closing statement, because obviously from your point of view that'll follow, that'll be after. It might be better to put that in at the close of the. Is it something that could be produced fairly simply, Mr. Armstrong? Is it something that could come, by the end of the week, perhaps?
Yes, ma'am. I think it is something that we could certainly put in the next 7 days. If you wanted by the end of the week, we could. I'm sure we could work towards that, having it in by Friday afternoon, which sets out a little bit more detail. I think it would probably be thinking about it better to come in at this stage rather than in my closing submission.
Yeah, thinking about it would be more useful, and it'd certainly be more useful for Ms. Henderson, who you might want to just in her closing statement probably pick up just on, so that she's got that level of understanding. So do you want to say Friday? If we say Monday, if we say the Monday coming, then it gives exactly 14 days for Ms. Henderson to respond to that. So I'll say this Monday, which is the 31st, she says confidently. Yes. 31 days in August, just checking. Yeah, so let's say the 31st, and it's there, it'll be available.
Can I make further comment on the information that has been provided?
Yes.
So in the information provided, one of the things is that when we're talking about the carbon intensity of operations, the benefit of the reduction in carbon associated with the electricity mix moving forward has been taken on board in the carbon loss, but we haven't taken into account in the previous assumption about the gas usage. So sorry, but I get the feeling that the best case for the calculations is to use both ways to suit the numbers. So from a point of view of we're going to displace purely gas for the next 100 years has been taken on one side, but on the other side we're going to use wind to minimise the amount of energy associated with our 20% loss of electricity associated with the use of the power station.
Yeah, I can explain that if that would be useful. So obviously when we're working out the losses, we have to take the assumed generation mix. So that's the assumed carbon intensity factor now, and then that at 2050. So that's how we get that loss number. When we're talking about the displacement of gas generation, it is exactly that. It's not displacement of grid carbon intensity energy, it is displacement of gas specifically. So in that case, we can use the carbon intensity factor associated with gas, because it's gas that is currently providing that balancing function. So that's the reason for the difference between the two.
So I am I'm chopping in and asking another question. Okay.
That's fine. That's okay.
That's okay.
So it's my hearing, not examination. But then what I'm struggling with is how you're also able to claim the 22 million carbon saving associated with the 2 degrees, because on one side you're saying you're offsetting the grid, the gas, and on the other side you're saying you're also bringing in another 22 million from the grid scenario, and I don't understand how you can have both. I understand how you can have one or the other, but not both. So I get how you could claim 22 million or 23 million. I can't get how you claim 45 million.
Yeah, so again, I think the answer is in 2 different packets, if you like. So if the balancing services, that is the services supporting the balancing function of the grid, we're displacing gas, that's where that comes from. So I think we've dealt with that. On the additional, if you like, the additionality of the renewables question. So that is the policy objective, which is that that additional renewables will be added to the grid mix, and in order to do that, because they're intermittent, a certain amount of storage is required to support that function, and therefore the correlation is that this amount of storage capacity deployed on the grid enables that generation from the additional renewables.
But if you didn't build this and you kept the gas, you'd be able to still have the offset and deal with that from a gas perspective. So it's one or the other. It can't be both in my mind.
Well, but in that context, there would be a policy failure, wouldn't there? And you would have to use the gas to support additional gas to support those renewables.
No, you wouldn't. I really don't understand the claim you're trying to make there, because you're basically saying that to support renewables we need to have, sorry, to balance the grid we're using this instead of gas, but the reason we need to balance the grid is because there's renewables on the grid, so we're replacing the gas with the pump storage to allow those renewables to continue to operate. Additionality would be keeping the gas as well, and that would give you the additional. So I can't understand how you can claim both. So it's one or the other. So you're either 22 million or 23 million. And I understand the policy context, but that's not the comment. The comment is regarding the claim regarding the carbon savings.
So rather than repeating myself, I was going to see if Bob can explain it a different way. Bob?
Yeah, so it's two sort of features here. One is about power system capacity, and the other is about energy. And the advantage of having pump storage is that it allows essentially more efficient, decarbonised grid operation by providing the type of services which sometimes don't require generating any energy at all. They can provide those services simply by providing reserve and response and so on. So you don't need to build a new gas plant to provide that. And then the second area is simply displacing the energy. So I mean, it sort of feels to me that this could be better explained, and perhaps the detailed submission could sort of go through that. But there are 2 different elements. One is more about using the power system better, and then the other is more about displacing gas directly. Using the power system better will reduce the amount of gas capacity that is needed on the system. So there are 2 elements there, but I think it's probably best to just try and explain that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, I think it is a tad confusing actually, and if you're not familiar with the way that the industry operates, getting some understanding of some of the terms and how it works, but that could be put down. I think that, yeah, it's just maybe just the unfamiliarity with it. If that could be better explained in your closing statement, I think that would be really, really helpful. You know, that's yourself, Mr. Hull, or Mr. Gillies, or a joint effort in your closing statement. Ms. Henderson, would that be useful? I appreciate you've got concerns around that issue. Could you give the applicant an opportunity to explain that in a bit more detail?
Yeah, I think that definitely needs done. So from a point of view of there's having capacity and there's generating electricity, and we're talking about specific carbon savings in total, and it needs to be clear in carbon terms how those have come from and what's submitted, because I understand both of the calculations. What I'm saying is you can't add them together and claim them both at the same time. So I think it needs to be explained better that how on earth we get additionality between those two functions to the extent that it's proposed here.
I think we're in agreement that that would be really useful addition to your closing statement. Okay. Question 11 is mostly been talked about, and I think we covered that earlier on. Just really touching on, just before we finish up for some lunch, I think we'll finish with this particular issue. Just homing in on peatland and expected construction of the head pond, which will have obviously a direct impact. How have the associated negative carbon emissions for that element been incorporated within the overall carbon assessment? Who's best placed to do it?
Thanks very much. Yeah, so the loss of peatland was taken into account. I think I mentioned earlier in the using the guidance that the Scottish Government already sort of set out in the wind farm context. So that was the kind of methodology, if you like, we adopted as far as we reasonably could. We obviously had an estimate of the amount of peatland on the site from the investigations done to date, and essentially working through that methodology, you get an output, and you know, that has been included in that construction impacts quantity of overall impact.
Okay, that's been included in the elements you were talking about earlier, that particular construction element. Okay,
that's right. And just to say that, you know, again, in that sort of overall context, you know, we adopted a very conservative view of that peat loss, just to make sure that you know, we weren't underestimating the issue. So just to maybe to exemplify in that, you know, in that Scottish Government document, it says, you know, we assume a certain amount of the carbon is essentially lost when the peat is excavated. So it's not, but we actually, in putting that figure together, we assumed it was all lost. So it's a conservative figure.
okay, thank you. That's an example. Ms. Henderson, is there anything you want to ask on this point?
Not particularly. The methodology is pretty robust and repeated all over the world. I'm pretty sure that they've followed the methodology, and as long as those numbers are in that. And will that come out then in the summary that we've?
Yeah, we'll make sure that the peat impact is specifically broken out.
Yeah, that'd be useful. Thank you. Okay, I think we're all probably due a bit of a lunch break now, and we can reconvene. I think I said 2 o'clock. I think we will go, if that's okay with everybody, we'll meet again at 2 o'clock, give everybody a reasonable break. I can't see us needing too long this afternoon. We've got 4 more questions to get through, and it really is just kind of to get under and understanding the net benefits of the project overall based on everything that we've talked about this morning. So I will ask Callum to, I think he needs to do something with the meeting at this stage to let us all come out, and then I will see you all again at 2 p.m. Thank you very much. Callum, hopefully you're suitably refreshed and fed, and we can continue this afternoon. As I said, we're getting to the kind of last section on this, to dealing with net benefits. So I don't think this will take us a particularly long time to conclude this afternoon. So I think we'll finish earlier than I originally thought. Now, just touching on to net benefits of the project, and I am really trying to understand the net benefits. So it's really helpful if the applicants, witnesses could take me through some of that in a bit of detail. So that's where the questions really are going. The first question I had was around the advantages of pumped storage hydro schemes over other electricity storage technologies, because you know there are other options out there. And I suppose it's just so I can understand the particular advantages that pumped storage hydro brings and what this project will actually bring. And I wonder if that's where that's best directed, Mr. Armstrong.
Ma'am, I think on this one, it's Robert Howell who's going to certainly start with this. And again, in the hearing statement, it's paragraphs 171 through 178, really. And I suppose the recognition in NPF 3 and also in the plan on energy storage, which is ILI 2.04, and the first 4 paragraphs of that, particularly paragraph 3, is the policy support and a helpful document, which again is referred to in the hearing statement, is the document which has been referred to earlier, ILI 210, which is the benefit of pumped storage hydro to the UK, and that's the document which was jointly funded by the Scottish Government, and in particular the pages in that, pages 16 through to 22, and with that introduction, if I'll pass over to Mr. Hull.
Right, can you hear me? Just checking.
Mm-hmm. Just take a minute.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so pump storage, I think as been mentioned earlier, is the most commonly used form of long duration storage. It's the cheapest form of long duration storage and is the most proven technology around the world. And it's very simple in concept and application, and has developed over many years in many countries. There are alternatives to using pump storage. The main one is probably batteries. And while the cost of batteries has been falling over recent years, the use of batteries at grid scale, at very high levels of capacity, is still relatively new. The technology is such that they are generally good for 1 or 2 hours of operation, and then they're discharged and require charging again. So they're quite good for fast operation, but not the longer duration storage. So they're good for providing some of the very short-term grid services, some of the peak services, but not for longer periods of operation. Those are lithium-ion batteries, which are the most commonly used type, and there are a number of installations of those that are increasing worldwide. But the technology is such that it doesn't last as long as pump storage. That's the components that go to make up the batteries themselves. They won't come anywhere close to the 100 years life of batteries, and they do, of pump storage, and they do degrade over time. So every time you charge and discharge, it slightly degrades the battery every time that it's used in that mode. So the battery has to be replaced relatively frequently compared to a pump storage operation. There are other technologies that are available. So compressed air, potentially hydrogen, flywheels, capacitors, but all of these I think fall into the category of unproven or very expensive compared to pump storage, which is why pump storage has been the dominant technology that's been used for longer duration storage over time. There are other ways of providing the sort of services that pump storage can provide. The most obvious is gas turbines, gas engines, and any fuel-sized, any fuel-propelled generators. But out of the different storage technologies, pump storage has a certain number of key features in terms of the services it offers, the reliability of the technology, and so on. Would it be helpful to sort of talk about sort of some of the other key features associated, the benefits that it brings, or would you like me to stop there?
Well, we're going to touch on a number of benefits specifically. So if you could talk about other things, I mean, I am going to pick up on the final point about the net benefits overall has been determined for the project. So I don't want to jump ahead just too soon. Okay, well, if perhaps I just sort of try and summarise the more sort of technical elements that it brings, and then perhaps we can cover the wider benefits later. So from a power system point of view, it not only provides the energy at peak, as we were discussing earlier, or at times when there is a shortage, but perhaps that's the best way of expressing it. When there is a shortage of supply, then pump storage can fill that gap at quite short notice. It also provides several system services, dynamic response, which provides support for frequency, voltage, and system stability. So that's very similar to what I was talking about earlier, the system services that it provides. So it provides a whole range of those, and we've detailed those in our response. It essentially provides support to the quality of supply, the security of supply that is available to customers. So it very much provides all the technical features that allow a reliable power supply under conditions of duress or under stable operation. So it provides all of those features, and it's quite unique in that it can provide all of those features, whereas some of the other technologies, such as batteries, for example, can't provide that. They don't have that dynamic feature to them, which pump storage does have. Okay, thank you. I'm going to pick up on the point you raised about security of supply and savings for customers. That's in the next question, just to explore that and keep it with you. But I'm just going to ask Ms. Henderson if she wants to comment on this particular, the descriptions of the advantages of pump storage hydro, what she agrees with, what other perspectives she has on the issue.
I think there's a couple of things. There's just two things from a point of view of alternatives that haven't been mentioned there. So you do have conventional hydro, which, although it can't store electricity produced as excess on the grid, what it can do is stop and start in the same way as pump storage hydro can. So effectively, it just doesn't produce when it's not needed, and it can produce the electricity when required. So it's actually a renewable source of electricity, but also has the flexibility that we're talking about with pump storage hydro. So conventional hydro is one option that could also be utilised instead of pump storage hydro, or even in combination. So you could have the opportunity where you would have a natural catchment leading into a hydro station. So it would generate electricity, but could be run backwards and more back uphill as well. So there's other hydro solutions as well as pump storage hydro as the first point. The other things about grid management and smart grid management. So there's obviously big moves to try and improve the way our grid operates in general. You know, there was mentions earlier, actually, electric cars, that, you know, you're going to plug in your car overnight. So you're going to use consumers are going to use electricity in different ways in the future. And then obviously the improvements in the grid structure itself to allow electricity to be moved around the grid where it's needed at the right times. And again, that allows you to incorporate more hydro into the grid. So for example, the NSN link between England and Norway, what that's going to do is it's going to allow for excess electricity in the UK to be sent over to Norway, and they will use their hydro to balance out the grid on our behalf and then send power back. So there's quite a lot of different solutions out there. We need to kind of be aware that they are out there. And yes, I agree that at the moment, some of these technologies are unproven and expensive, but in 5-6 years' time, by the time this project potentially comes online, those technologies will have also developed and the price of them will have come down. There's also, and it's picked up in the FES strategy, the community side of things, that there'll be much more local supply of electricity and local solutions as well. Whether that's, I mean, even looking at modular nuclear in the future, there are other technologies out there.
Okay, thank you.
So I wonder if Claire, if I could maybe just
You can, yeah.
in response, thank you. I mean, just very briefly, and I think to, in a way, support some of Fiona's comments there, that, you know, I think our best gaze at the future is through these future energy scenarios that we referred to before. And I think the important point maybe to say is that, you know, I think we acknowledge there'll be a range of storage technologies required to deliver our hopefully our low carbon and decarbonisation objectives. I think the point is that those technologies occupy different spaces within the range of solutions, some of which can overlap to an extent, as Bob has mentioned. Yeah, but for example, you know, we know at present, and then you know, hydrogen production is relatively inefficient, can be high carbon depending on the source, and it's likely we're going to need that to help us decarbonise our transport sector. Similarly, you know, and as mentioned by Fiona, then, you know, batteries, I think it's acknowledged and is in that future energy scenarios document, will have an important role to balance supply and demand, certainly at a domestic scale, although there are some grid deployments as well with the sort of limitations that Bob described. So these things will tend to occupy different parts of the storage matrix. But I think maybe our point is that, you know, pump storage is the only large scale grid connected and proven technique of storing large quantities of energy in the way that we're going to need to achieve our 2050 objectives.
I mean, could I add a couple of comments? So just to come back on the point of about conventional hydro, I would completely agree. I think conventional hydro can offer many of the same features. It is a rotating generator. It offers the same sort of dynamic response. If it's designed in the same way, it can stop and start. It depends on the scale, the location, as to whether it offers the same features, because not all hydro plants or indeed tidal plants can operate in as flexible a way. They are sort of more dictated by water flows, whereas advantage of pump storage over normal hydro is that you have far more choice over whether you're pumping or generating. So it offers an additional level of flexibility, but it's not to decry the value of hydro, which is absolutely valuable. And I think that's really the aim of the NSN link, to gain access potentially to the hydro that is in Norway. But what I would say is that that's not necessarily the case, because it will depend what's happening in the rest of the European market, and the Norwegians will sell their hydro to whoever wants to pay for it, and whether that's balancing wind generation in Germany or Denmark or wherever. So absolutely, it offers an opportunity to do that, but it can sit alongside pump storage. And the advantage of having pump storage in Scotland is that it is available locally. It doesn't have to come 500 miles or whatever it is from another country that is then dependent on trading arrangements and the choices that their generator makes to export to another country. On the point about grid management, I think we're heading to a very exciting future where we all as consumers can get involved much more and engage with the grid, having our own solar panels, storage, and being able to import and export energy, and having electric vehicles as well. But that actually offers both an opportunity to the grid, but also a challenge, in that we all tend to consume energy at quite similar times, or we all want to charge our vehicles at quite similar times, and that can increase demand and require generation like pump storage in place. So there is a sort of a two-way street here of distributed energy may actually require more flexibility services to be available. And looking at the national grid scenarios, they identify that there is more storage needed, but don't split it between what is distributed storage and what is grid storage. But I think the conclusion one can draw is that there's probably more of both that are needed as a result. So certainly the national grid scenarios do take account of the evolution of grid management, but it would have to increase an awful long way from where it is today to completely accommodate all the flexibility requirements, and then would face the same situation that it is up to individual customers as to how they participate in that, whether they want to let their electric vehicle charge the grid or not. So there will be sort of questions about whether that is as reliable as having a pump storage facility which is contracted to do exactly that.
Just a point, as you were talking there, I was just thinking about the proportions at which this project will deliver in terms of storage capacity. And I think in your response to Mr. Townsend, it's a statement at the back of the hearing statement, matters of dispute or outstanding. There's just a point I just wanted, I think, just so I understand this correctly, I think it says here that development will add an additional 450 megawatts of peak capacity to supplement the existing 4 gigawatts, i.e. a greater than 10% increase, which is significant. So, proportionally, you're saying, what proportion would this project, and I know it's difficult, it may change over time, but at its outset, it starts operationally, what proportion would it represent of Scotland and UK-wide storage capacity? Just so I get a feel for the overall picture.
So at the moment, there's in the UK, there's about 4 gigawatts of storage capacity, 4,000 megawatts. Okay. So this would add an additional 10%. The forecasts that National Grid are setting out is in our document. The 2019 FES identified something like 20 to 30 gigawatts that were needed. the latest one identifies numbers in excess of 40 gigawatts, you know, so a more than 10 times multiple of where we are today. And that's just storage in the UK. Growth in interconnectors is on top of that. Because in simple terms, what this is doing is replacing all the gas generators that exist in the UK, and there's tens of gigawatts of those at the moment. So over the next 30 years, it's really finding renewables and storage and interconnectors that can replace the gas generators that currently exist.
This will serve UK wide then. It's not.
Yes, it will. I mean, it will be very important for security of supply in Scotland, but it will serve the whole of the UK electricity market. The thing with electricity, just to highlight, is that it has to be consumed the instant it's produced. So it has to be kept in balance, and this storage is a way of ensuring that there is some backup, some reserve capacity, so that that the whole electricity system can be kept in balance, and that's kept in balance across the whole of the UK at any single second.
And you mentioned it's important for Scotland. On what basis?
So it's because to keep a power system stable, you have to have some generation and some voltage support in particular areas of the country. If you have no generation of that type in any particular area of the country, it is prone to, if you get any sort of failure, the whole system can collapse. So you can end up having sort of no generation that's able to respond to a fault in a particular part of the country, so that if there is then a fault, everything will collapse due to low voltage or potentially low frequency in that part of the country. So when the system was sort of planned originally, there would be power stations spread all over the country. Now we're in a place where there's market mechanisms that encourage generation to locate in different places. So this would be in exactly the right part of the country where there is a reducing amount of generation. There's really only Peterhead in the north of Scotland, and then you've got the two big nuclear power stations, Hunterston, Torness, but those will be closing in the mid-20s. And other power stations like Kirkensey, Longannet have all closed in recent years. So having a power station such as the one proposed here would replace some of the security of supply that those other power stations previously offered.
Okay, thank you for taking me through that in a bit more detail. Ms. Henderson, is there anything you want to come in at?
I think there's a great deal more to explain about how the grid works. I think that the point is that it is one grid, and therefore we are connected to England, but there's in the whole of the UK, but there is bottlenecks in the system in various places. And I think you responded, because I asked specifically about whether or not there was grid constraints, and you did respond to that. I don't know if it's underpinned by anything, but it was responded, and it wouldn't surprise me that there aren't grid constraints in this area, none the pylons at the back door, and the substation that's just gone in.
So if I can just respond on that, there are quite significant grid constraints in Scotland. It's one of the most constrained areas of the country, simply because there's so much generation, wind generation in Scotland needs to export to England. And with recent developments, for example, the potential wind farm on Shetland, which will need to move its power south, that is all going to require quite major investment in new networks over a period of time. So there are quite significant constraints at the moment, and indeed, as as we speak, there is wind generation being constrained off, prevented from running in Scotland simply because there isn't sufficient capacity to transport that power to England. So over coming years, there will have to be reinforcements to the network to allow that wind energy to export. And obviously that will increase with offshore wind farms as they're developed over time as well.
So Bob, sorry, just to chip in there. I mean, I think the point there is that, you know, the pump storage development and storage in general is designed to facilitate the operation of that grid and make it more efficient, so that you know, modifications and upgrades can be more easily done. You know, it's a development that's designed to make that easier.
Yeah. So just to give an example, the problem tends to be exporting overnight when there's very little demand in Scotland. So the wind farms are generating at full capacity overnight. There's very little local demand to use it. So so you've got a couple of alternatives. Either you create demand, which is of course what pump storage can do overnight, or you have to build a new transmission line to allow that export to take place. So, you know, Ian's point, which I completely agree with, is that pump storage can actually make savings by not having to build a new transmission line, for example, or reinforce existing ones. So it is a constant balance between generation, transmission capacity and demand, and pump storage has the benefit that it can add demand to that mix at times that are needed, and it's particularly relevant for Scotland, where there's so much wind generation and so much potential for export.
Okay, thank you. Right, let me just sort of go through that. I'm just moving on to question 14, and the economic benefit of the project is talked about. It's just focusing on economic benefits, employment benefits to the local economy. There'll be a range of benefits that will be derived. One of which it's referred to is energy cost savings to customers by enabling flexibility in service provision. I understand the concept behind that. But I suppose my question is really, are they considered to be net benefits? And what are the kind of threats that there might be to the achievement of those savings over time? Mr. Hull, do you want to come in there?
Yes, yeah, if that's okay. So some of the savings we've talked about. So one of the savings, for example, will be networks, not needing to build connection infrastructure, transmission infrastructure. It's possible to export more energy at times when the network is other constrained. So the cost of connections from Scotland to England are for additional connections are expected to be around sort of £2 billion for one of these subsea cables to connect the north of Scotland to somewhere in England. So that's the sort of scale of investment that can either be delayed or reduced as a result of having this type of capability. So there is a saving that is available because of that. The other main saving is that you have there's an ability not to build gas-fired power stations to operate purely at peak. So the way that the energy market operates at the moment is that the peak demand has to be met and there has to be a reserve margin in place to meet that. So that would require additional gas generators to be built simply to run for that hour or whenever it was that it was required to operate. So it would mean that that plant wouldn't be required. This analysis, so it's sort of network and additional peaking generation, which is the main saving. And that's the work in the document. We gave you an extract of some work that had been done by Cambridge University, which had modelled, sorry, not Cambridge, Imperial, that had modelled these savings of having storage in place rather than having this gas generation and additional networks. And there was some additional work, again, we've quoted from the National Infrastructure Commission, which again had identified, I think it was their Smart Power report, that had identified this level of savings. And they looked at the net savings in both of those reports and said, looked at the counterfactual of what would happen with and without storage. And that's the conclusion that they came to. I think the conclusion from the Imperial work was something like £8 billion a year of savings from having additional flexibility in the system. Obviously, not all of those savings are attributable to this particular installation, but it will contribute in part to that. So this was essentially having more flexibility means less network investment and less investment in gas-fired power stations that will only run for short periods of time.
I suppose, Bob, would you include the avoidance of constraints payments in that?
Yes, yeah. I mean that's a very good point. That I suppose that also comes into the decarbonisation benefits. You're not constraining renewable generators from running. So the way the electricity market works is that if a generator is constrained from running because of a limit on the transmission network, then it's paid at whatever price it bids in that market. So costs are running for the last few years at about over £100 million a year paid to Scottish wind farms mainly for not running. So again, making a saving on that can make quite a significant difference. So yes, this study looks at how you mitigate those type of costs.
What do you think might be potential threats of achieving those savings, though? What kind of?
Well, I suppose what we're looking at is essentially a more efficient power system that allows the a market that allows this mode of operation. I think probably this is also assumes that market continues to operate, that the UK it continues to have a market system. Clearly, if government policy changes and the policy is, I don't know, to subsidise a certain technology ahead of another technology, whether that's I don't know, gas with carbon capture and storage, for example, deciding that that's the technology that's going to be supported rather than letting economics win through, then that would be a significant threat. And again, you sort of get into some of the other policy changes where, if, for example, the security standards were to change and government decided that actually it was cheaper if we all put up with, I don't know, more power cuts, then clearly you wouldn't need this level of flexibility. But I think that's sort of fairly unlikely. But those are the type of threats to those savings. If we're in a situation where the economics are sort of playing through, then the savings should be realised.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Henderson, do you want to speak on the question?
Yeah, I would.
Oh, Willie's not hearing you very well there. Do you want to just...
better?
That's better, yeah.
The only real comment I've got is that the scale of these savings that are in the report by University of Cambridge and Imperial College London, they start at a certain amount, and to be able to deflect an infrastructure cost, there needs to be a scale factor in this project in its own right. Wouldn't give the scale factor to avoid an East Coast bootstrap, for example, which is the 1.2 billion saving that I think Mr. Hull was referring to. So this project in its own right wouldn't contribute those scales, and how much it would contribute to the base to work up to that, I don't honestly know. So it's just to be aware that there's a minimum amount required before you have that large scale scaling, because you're basically talking a U-turn on a decision as to how energy is going to go from Scotland to England to bypass the central belt bottleneck in the electricity grids.
I mean, if I can just come back on that. I mean, yeah, that's a very fair point. I mean, what I would say is that by having this sort of capacity, you could potentially reduce the size of that interconnector and bring the price down. The other thing is that it may simply push back the need for that by a period of time, and then you would have the time value of that sort of delay and not having to spend that that expenditure for some time. But and also it depends on whether other similar projects are built. It depends on what the demand is and a whole range of other factors. I think all we can sort of try and look at is the sort of what the difference would be by having this. Clearly there will be decisions that are outside this particular project that will have an impact on what size and when a new interconnector is built.
Maybe just to reinforce Bob's point there, you know, I think we could also say that, you know, this is you know, as Fiona points out, this is not one, you know, it's not the one size that will defer a decision like that, but incrementally it's part of a series of decisions on a kind of policy strand that, when taken together, can influence bigger decisions like that. So I think it's just one component of the overall picture.
Okay, I understand. Right, thank you for that. I'm going to move on to the next question. And Ms. Henderson, did you want to come in there?
Just a minor point to note, Mr. Hull, that you wouldn't downscaling an interconnector doesn't have a major cost saving, because the costs are not necessarily associated with the generation or transmission capacity. It's the installation and certain other parts of it, but that's a technicality. So.
Okay, thanks. We have other net benefits, one of which is biodiversity and woodland, which is described in the environmental impact assessment. And in particular, homed in on certain things in here about the removal of the commercial forestry that's on parts of the site, with a 7.1 increase in native broadland woodland and a 15% increase in mixed native broadland woodland as well, along with other specified benefits. There's a number of things identified. So can I just understand a little bit more about how the benefits have been determined as net when balanced with the overall environmental impact of the project? Because I think it's just the ability to see the net benefits relative to these other factors. Mr. Armstrong?
Yeah, well, perhaps if Catherine Anderson addresses this one, but also in relation to question 14 and the aspect of that, which I don't think we've really talked about yet, the economic benefits of the project being described in terms of employment benefits to the local economy.
Yeah, I was happy
maybe if it draws that into 14 and 15.
Yeah, happy to go into great amount of detail on the economic side of it. I was focusing on the cost savings, which is why we went down that particular route, but I'm happy for Catherine to touch on those and to give me some background to the employment, and to enlighten me a little bit more if there's anything more detail she wants to add. And then it's the kind of the overall environmental project impact of the project versus the net benefits that have been cited as well in the EIA. So I'll let Catherine go on with that.
Perhaps Catherine could sort of almost tie in 14, 15 and 16, which is sort of between them all in relation to the response.
Thank you, ma'am. Just to start on question 14. Is that better now?
Yes.
Sorry. Yes, just to carry on with the economics. This project represents an opportunity, a significant one, for a substantial investment into the Highlands, and that's both to protect and also to provide jobs as well. As the chapter 2 of the EIR states that up to 390 personnel will be employed directly during construction, with a peak average, at peak with an average of over 205 over the construction period, and that will be in a variety like engineering, project management, support, and environmental positions as well. During operational phase, there'll be up to 10 permanent skilled jobs that will be required, and then also the regular maintenance, and that is required throughout the lifetime of the project as well, which presents those also direct opportunities. So just to put it into context, that these jobs, these new jobs, the creation of these new jobs can be considered as net, because this project will actually create those opportunities, and therefore that has been highlighted and recognised in the responses we've received, especially that of the Highland Council Committee report. So I think it's paragraph 8.97 and 896 of the December committee report recognises those, and also the indirect benefits of the project as well. So those would be the jobs that are required or support required for the workers in the locality for accommodation, the increased footfall and expenditure within the local community as well, and also other support services such as the construction support and, for example, marine transport that's required to bring in the equipment in via the Caledonian Canal, for example. So this project wouldn't actually divert jobs away from other projects, the creation of new jobs, and also it wouldn't have a significant effect on tourist attractions either. So therefore we do consider these jobs, these opportunities, the employment and the socioeconomic benefits can be seen as net in that context.
Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you.
About the final part of your question 14, I suppose the threat to those opportunities, those benefits, would be the project not gaining consent, and therefore those jobs specifically in relation and associated with the project would not go ahead. The local investment opportunities would not go ahead. The local community benefits in terms of the terms of reference agreement with the local community stores in Essex would not go ahead. And also the project's contribution towards the net targets for 2050 would also not be achieved.
Okay.
Would you like me to go on to question 15?
Yes, I'm fine. Yeah, move on to 15. Yeah, that's fine.
Great. So my colleagues, Mr. Gillies and Mr. Hull, have already outlined the primary purpose of the development, and that's to provide services to balance the grid and also decarbonise and produce a sustainable energy network. So I'm not going to repeat that conversation and focus my responses here on the main question you've got here. So there are many benefits, and yes, collectively each one of those could tip the balance for the project, and it's recognised that this project has many overriding benefits, of which you've picked out one for the biodiversity and the forestry. And it's also recognised that in combination that most of these benefits will have both legacy and long-term socio-economic and environmental benefits for some time. So when we talk around benefits for the project, we're talking about both quantity and quality as well. Also in respect to the time that these can be implemented, and also in the spatial extent that these benefits can also be implemented as well. So the nature of the proposed felling of the commercial forestry within the development site presents an opportunity to enhance the structure and diversity of the reinstated woodland, and it's this change from the commercial forestry to the extensive native woodland planting which provides the greatest positive change, and that was outlined in our landscape and visual hearing statement, paragraph 1.6. So that also follows on with the conclusion of chapter 12, forestry of the EIR, which is ILI reference 8.13. which states that the development would significantly improve the existing woodland habitat and continue to provide multiple benefits for the ecosystem and local community long past the development, the lifespan of the development. So combining this with the management of the lochside vegetation and the new habitat creation and landscaping that can be accommodated along the protection and enhancement of existing habitats, this project will provide those benefits both in terms of quantity and quality. Now, coming back onto the point around the time of which these can be implemented, this example of the forestry can be implemented from day one, almost day -1, if you like. Apologies, I'm going to be pulling up a couple of documents now, so I will give you time to do these.
Yeah, could you just take time, please, if you could? And just
Yep. So insert 2.1 of our project description, chapter 2, which is ILI reference 8.03.
Just one second.
I'll do a Blue Peter moment. I can bring it up here if that helps.
8 point, which did you say? 8 point, ILI
8.003.
Oh, I wasn't told that
That's
was
page 20.
I wasn't told we were going to that today. Right, let me just get that up on my other list. 8.03.
I can show it on screen if that helps, because it's literally just the table that I want to reference.
Yeah, fine. Okay, yeah, I'll get to it while you just pop it up.
Okay. So this table here provides us with the construction timeline. And the first part of this in year 1 identifies that there's a pre-construction period. In this period, we can implement some early forestry and some improvement works. And these will be in 5 key areas. I'm going to pull up figure 12.7, which is ILI reference 9.89.
I've got this one listed.
So again, I've done a bit of a blue peeper moment again, and just to highlight my point, because
right, yeah, got that in front of me.
when I spoke to Callum trying to do this, we couldn't share screens. So in order to illustrate the areas, I've got rows. So one of the first areas in which is in the area of the ancient woodlands down at the lochside.
Okay.
So here we have the installation of deer and stock fencing near the tail pond infrastructure. And this is to improve the quality and implement proper management of the ancient woodland. Again, this can be installed at day 1, therefore providing that benefit straight away. The second areas in which we could have creation and early establishment of new native woodland would be in areas near the B&B, which is shown on the area next to you.
Yeah.
So again, that is something we can implement early. There's also, and that's also to provide a degree of screening in combination with earth buns as well. There's also 2 large areas of woodland, which is shown here on 12.1, sorry, figure 2, large blocks of new woodland, broadleaf woodland creation. And again, those can be implemented early.
I'm just taking my time, just a second. I'm just taking
No
my time
problem.
for all of these so I know which areas you're referring to. Go back. 1 second, I'm going to put number 3 on. I'm trying to be clever on the screen here, whether I'm particularly clever.
Okay, I can provide a mocked up version of this if that would help.
That's good, actually, that would be good, yeah, just to show it marked up in terms of it. I mean, I'm catching the areas you're talking about, so I'm managing to do it. Okay, yes.
And then the fourth area then would be along the realigned C1064, which is along here. You can see this orange line.
Yes, yeah.
So as part of the pre-construction works, we have to realign the C1064 to allow open access and to maintain access for users of that throughout the construction phase. And as part of that, we would create bunds along that realignment and plant with woodland edge and scrub planting once the road is constructed.
Yeah.
And then the fifth area is this green area at the top here. And that's an improvement in woodland type. It's an area to the northwest of the head pond, and that would also be improved in the same way that we would do with the ancient woodland towards the head pond, as in we would remove the invasive species, control browsing herbivores, and reintroduce complementary native species to improve the overall condition of the habitat. And that area there provides a significant contribution towards the 209.7 hectares of change of woodland type that is outlined within the forestry chapter. There are other references specifically to sections within the Landscape and Ecology Management Plan, which was submitted within the section 36 as Appendix 3.2, which is ILI reference
1102, yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
I think that
and specifically, sorry.
That's okay. I'm just saying that if you gave me, it was referred to as 11. It was ILI 11.01. It's actually 1102. Just if anybody the list that I was provided, so you know the difference. Okay. Yeah. Fine. 3.2. Carry on.
So these can all be implemented. These measures can be conditioned via the agreed conditions with the Highland Council. That's number 32. And also via the LEMP as well, so the Landscape and Ecological Management Plan. Another example of these benefits would also be the creation of the 4.3 hectares of juniper woodland, which represents a substantial increase against the number of plants that are lost, and that is shown in figure 3.2.1 of the LEMP. The actual number of juniper bushes that are lost is a very small percentage of the approximately 1,000 bushes that we have identified within the red line boundary, but still it represents a significant net increase of the habitat that is being created for the project. In addition, the positive change in establishing the native woodland removal is also in line with the overriding request from the local community, and that is recorded in table 3.1 of the PAC report. And in this, it's supported by the SLA citation as well for the potential for the landscape enhancement, which states that opportunities may exist to restructure existing forest and to reduce the adverse impacts of some existing plantation and incorporate greater proportion of native woodlands using current best forestry design practice. It will be particularly important to mitigate the incongruity of the scale edges and species of some forest edges, which are clearly apparent when viewing from opposite sides of the glen. So this this forestry restructure that has been proposed as part of the project has received no objections. In fact, it has overriding community support, which we've recorded via the consultation process, and indeed the Forestry Commission response also notes no objection of this as well, and in fact welcomes the enhancement of the native woodland to remove invasive species and control grazing measures, for example. There are other opportunities which will be implemented via the project that has been highlighted under the second set of bullet points in the 0.4.4, and those include other measures that we've put within the hearing statement, but it also include things like the new bat boxes for...
Catherine, sorry, you've lost me.
Sorry.
Just lost me again very quickly. You just lost me there, that last introduction, a couple of bullet points. So where are we now? Just take me back a little bit.
So we're, it's the second set of bullet points under paragraph 3.4.4 of the Landscape and Ecological Management Plan.
Hey, Catherine, just to say you're cutting out in the audio sometimes, so that's maybe why we're not following. Thanks.
Let me just get paragraph 3.4.4. You're doing very, very quickly as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
It's broken online, really broken. Sorry.
We can hear you now, Catherine.
Yeah, okay, sorry. See, third time lucky. So it's paragraph 3.4.4 of the Landscape and Ecology Management Plan. So that second set of bullet points provides the species-specific enhancement measures. So, for example, the bat boxes, the new artificial diver raft that will be on Lochen and Ian Ruder for the red black-throated divers, and a new artificial osprey nest in Deerwood as well. So, in a holistic sense, all these benefits deliver those net benefits which you've outlined in the question, and this holistic approach combines both the biodiversity and the landscape and the forestry measures, and that is currently secured via condition 30 for the LEMP and 31 and 32 for the forestry plan. I think one other thing of note as well is to demonstrate the applicant's commitment to these measures is that the section 3.8 of the LEMP also provides the commitment to explore biodiversity net gain. At the time of submission, it was the first DEFRA metric which had been released, and there have been other measures and metrics since. Biodiversity net gain is not a compulsory measure for projects in Scotland, but this project presents a unique opportunity to be an exemplar project, and therefore the LEMP it secures that that opportunity to explore and demonstrate biodiversity net gain.
The biodiversity net gain, is that something that SNH is rolling out in projects, or is that something that's come through from the industry?
I mean, it's something that's rolled out in the industry. England has projects in England have a very different view of life, and actually it's compulsory for projects that come under town and country planning. It's not compulsory for major, it's the equivalent of a section 36 in England and Wales. It's not compulsory. But in Scotland, given the opportunity that this project has, it is something that we do wish to explore. We did have initial conversations with SNH with it. Obviously, at the time, it was very embryonic, but obviously, it's something that we are willing to commit to show that it can be done on a project of this scale.
Is that covered by the suggested conditions, or is it something that maybe could be covered by condition, or is it?
Well, it's something that we're committed to as part of the LEMP, and the LEMP is conditioned as part of 30 and 31.
Okay, I can have a look at that. Thank you.
So in terms of the other net, I mean, do you want me to continue just to summarise the landscape and ecology, or go on to the other net benefits as well?
I think we're getting into quite a lot of detail, and a lot of this I can find. What I'm really wanting to understand is overall, I'm getting a good flavour for what the net benefits are. I know they're all captured somewhere. It's that kind of bit about how the applicant has actually done that balance between these are all considered to be net, so they're in addition to, but then balanced with the other factors. I understand they're all gains, is what you're saying. They're all gains, but it's that element of impact, environmental impact alongside that, and where that's in and how that's been tackled by the applicant. Okay.
Yep. So I mean, in terms of implementing the mitigation hierarchy, you know, there have been several things which already have been embedded within the design of the project. So, for example, this is outlined more in depth in Chapter 4 of the EIR, where we've gone through the alternatives of the project, both in terms of location, but also in terms of its configuration as well. So, for example, the use of not go into lockdown Chelchik and because of invasive species issues, and then the orientation of the head pond and whether that would be used in two existing lock-ins or where it's currently is situated. But even still, that the orientation of the head pond has been moved in consultation as a response of the consultation that has been undertaken as part of the project. Other embedded features as well. Go into, you know, how we've used a closed loop system, how we've designed the tail pond infrastructure, how we've looked to orientate the project and locate things like the compounds away from areas of sensitivity and the storage areas, the way that we've demonstrated via the SEA, the SEI and the FEI submissions that the project looked at other transport means by the use of the Caledonian Canal to reduce the amount of impact upon the highways. The use of the park and ride scheme, for example. So these are all things that have both been used to embed mitigation within the design of the project, and also then how we've then implemented the mitigation hierarchy to where we can't avoid impacts, where we sought to reduce them, and then ultimately where we sought to compensate them. So the LEMP does go into detail in section 3.4.4, that first set of bullet points, which looks at the mitigation measures that are to ensure no net detriment, but then it also goes into the measures which then, as you say, are the net benefits as well.
Okay.
A lot of these have also been voluntary. The applicant has sought through either responses and consultation responses from the local communities to actually implement these measures and record them and get them secured via condition as well. So, for example, the movement of the monument of Cathia Finon, that has been via consultation with Mr. Sandilans and the Gaelic group, and that is a voluntary measure that will seek to do that, and again integrate that within the existing improvements which are going to be implemented via new access tracks linking to the long distance routes and the core paths as well. Sorry, my screen is frozen. Okay, I'm back.
Are you back? You're okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything further you want to go into before we?
I mean, those are all benefits, obviously, that we've done within the red line boundary. There are other things which have been provided which are outside the red line boundary. So, for example, the legacy highway improvements, which are going to be on the construction routes, and the applicant has said that even those which might be identified via the project liaison group, if there are any other benefits which may be of relevance or importance to local communities via that forum, that obviously can be considered as well. The 5 year 100% renewable energy target, 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 100% renewable energy voluntary commitment to provide the minibus for the Stratheric Community Council, which again is a legacy benefit. So we talked about the compensatory planting. Another one of note is the contribution towards the smolt tracking research project via the Ness Fisheries Board. That's in conjunction with the University of Glasgow, and that again is to, whilst we've embedded measures within the project to demonstrate that we won't have an impact upon the smolt tracking the smolt population, we're actually contributing towards that because it is a nationwide problem.
I'll just take you back to the compensatory planting, Catherine. Just ask you on that. Just is that a matter that's been covered by the conditions, and is an area,
yes.
An area identified for compensatory planting? Has it been selected yet?
So 12.1 hectares of off-site compensatory planting is to be identified out with the red line boundary, and that is via discussions with the Forestry Commission. I think that is conditioned as well via condition 33. Yeah, 33.
We're by 33. Okay. Okay, anything further you want to add at that point? No. Okay, that's useful. That's a useful run through of the kind of key it's particularly around biodiversity and woodland, which is the aspects that I wanted, the ecology I wanted to home in on a little bit. Can I ask, Ms. Henderson, do you want to comment on any of that?
I think there's kind of 2 or 3 things. One is the fact that a lot of the forest that we're talking about, as you've seen yourself, is quite mature and ready for felling. And what then happens to that going forward if it wasn't for the potential for hydro in the area would be agreed with the Forestry Commission and would follow best practice moving forward. So although the plans that have been put forward are laudable, we don't need a hydropower station pump storage hydro for those things to happen in the local area. I understand that obviously the funding and some of the impetus in this case would come through the development, but there are other ways for that to be achieved. I've got a question regarding effectively land ownership for all these areas on the figure that I've pulled up in the 12.7 figure, which is the stuff in the red line, the yellow bits down the left hand end and whatever else, all the forestry that you're discussing, Catherine, with Blue Peter style, that the things in there, whether or not that land is then all going to be owned by the developer and therefore maintained by the developer to ensure that continues to happen, or whether there's going to be third parties involved in that, and what the guarantees are for that going forward over the next 100 years. And then the final part is the kind of technicality of whether or not it's a net benefit or whether it's a case of its compensation, and it's the fact that the developer has the money to do it doesn't mean to say that it's a net benefit. It could have been done in other ways. It is offset in an area that is being felled for other reasons. And over the next 100 years, all these things would have been developed anyway because the plantations are coming to maturity. So really, my questions are around the ongoing management of this and land ownership to ensure that it does happen. And I would argue on a technicality that all of that could have happened without the pump storage hydro. Of course, I'm going to argue that.
Yeah, there's a few things in that. Yeah, there's around the suggestion that this over time, this may happen in some form, in any way, and also the future land ownership of these areas and how they'll be managed. And then that kind of, is that net benefit? Is that just something that would ultimately, how is the applicant thinking about that as net benefit, and how does that come into their analysis? Catherine, could you pick up on that, please?
Yeah, of course. I mean, in terms of the maintenance of the forestry, I mean, if the project did not exist, then that commercial forestry would continue. And obviously it would go through, as Vicente has said, you know, it's standard commercial forestry processes. But that wasn't the overriding request of the community when we actually went out and did the consultation. So, you know, the fact that even though you could say forestry is going back in, it is of a higher quality, better biodiversity quality, and therefore promotes that betterment in change, in improvement in the quality and quantity, because we are looking at an increase of broadleaf native woodland in there as well. So in terms of that going forward, that is secured by condition. So the LEMP 30 and 31, that in the section in there actually provides a 3.9 provides the management and objectives of these improvements going in place. That would also be conditioned and therefore would be required until its establishment going forward, therefore creating yet another avenue for employment opportunities to ensure that actually does happen. In terms of the forestry, that is conditioned via 32, via the forestry plan, and therefore again that's another mechanism in which that project element will be taken forward for perpetuity of the project, notwithstanding that the woodland would obviously establish itself. In some cases earlier, you know, where we're looking at early planting, we've almost got a 6-year head start, as opposed to then the planting that goes in then that's available to do so once construction finishes, or actually in areas of construction that can go ahead earlier than the operational phase.
Okay, you were breaking up a little bit then. I was trying to just trying to follow you a bit there. The point being made was about, you know, in the progression of time that the forestry would be felled, and there would be a visual improvement. You mentioned the community being involved, and I didn't quite understand what was there. Was it their will to have, in the consultation with the community, their will was to have something done sooner? Was that the point you were making?
No, sorry, that they didn't like the views of the commercial forestry.
Yes, so they were. Yeah, so ultimately they would like to see that replaced with broadleaf, woodland.
Yeah, yeah. Mainly from well, the views that you get from when you're on the Great Glen Canoe Trail, and also from the Great Glen Way, which is on the opposite bank, but also users of the area as well. So dog walkers, there's obviously businesses that do horse riding in the area, that do some of the comments we had about some of the walking routes, some of the self-guided routes, you know, improving the amenity and the experience, linking, you know, that part of Loch Ness on its way to from Inverness and the long distance routes and the core paths. That was something that came out quite strongly in the... Sorry, did you get that?
I got probably 2/3 of it. Missed the last kind of element of it, just in terms of, you were just talking about the linkages in terms of what would be the improvements and the connections with, I think you mentioned the Great Glen Way and a few other things.
Yeah, so it's the self-guided walks that come from the core paths to the southwest of the site, so behind the head pond, through down then into doors and then further on as well, which is why we've tried to again do this holistic approach to forestry, the recreation, the amenity, the biodiversity, linking in then the educational signage, you know, all those types of elements we've tried to kind of pull together so it doesn't seem so isolated or siloed, so it just creates a more holistic approach. But that was something that came out quite strongly and is recorded in the PAC report.
And do you think that is something that wouldn't necessarily be achievable without this project going ahead? That's, you know, because of all the disparate elements that need to come together, this project brings all that together. Is that what you're suggesting? And that's where the net benefit is over the natural progression of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Ms. Henderson, do you want to come in?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Specifically, 3.9, it mentions a 25-year maintenance plan. It's not clear from the text in there. I can understand why maintenance plan, you can't write it for 80 years' time just now, but it does imply by that it's only going to be maintained for 25 years. and you've still not really clarified the land ownership record there to make sure it does stay within the developer's control, or what agreements are in place to ensure it actually happens.
That would be then through the forestry plan. Sorry, did you get that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So what's the crack with the land ownership? Is it going to be owned by yourselves?
So she's asking about the land ownership issue, Catherine. I just wondered if you could just clarify how that's going to work.
So the ILI will have control over that.
For the next 100 years?
Over what period, I think, was the point that the point being made?
Sorry, I'm just conversing with yeah, it's a long-term lease.
Does it have a time period? Can you turn your volume? We can't hear you, Catherine.
If there was any a subject to the yeah, it would be for the lifetime of the project, I'm being advised.
The lifetime of the project. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So with so just to clarify that, the EIR obviously states that this project could have a 125-year life cycle. So it'd
Right.
be it would be for that period.
Did I catch that right, Catherine? Can you just say that again, just so I'm clear? So
the lifetime of the project is 125 years. So therefore, the lease agreement would be for that time period.
125. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Could you just mute? Thanks. Ms. Henderson, is there anything further you want to raise on that?
Yeah, I think it's actually a point that you raised is that what happens when developers go in and get public consultation is the local community actually for once speak to each other and come up with brilliant ideas, and that things can be progressed in other ways and be developed in other ways. So yes, I get what Catherine's saying is that, or potentially the word you put in her mouth, that the project being there becomes a catalyst for things to change and move in that direction. But if the community really has that as what they would like to do, then there's ways for that to be master planned and added in. And if the landowners of the opinion they're willing to rent all the land to a developer, then there's, you know, it would suggest there's opportunity for other people to rent the land or do other things with that landowner and change the forestry. It should also be noted, although from an ecological perspective, it is potentially beneficial to move from commercial to non-commercial forestry. Commercial forestry also has a socio-economic benefit. So, you know, it's not purely one is better than the other. There's a difference, and there's a difference in demand, and it's about getting the right mix. You know, it's laudable for a developer to come along and say, well, we're going to do this improvement, but it should be seen as compensation.
Catherine, do you want to come back on that?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part of that. The screen froze, sorry.
Do you want to just yeah.
I'm just saying that it's, although it's laudable for, you know, and I'm not knocking the work that Catherine's team have come up to design all of this, but from a developer's perspective, it's about developer putting money into the community because that's what they've got to be seen to do to get consent, and that's compensation. It might be seen as, is it more than we had before? Potentially, but it's at the price of the head pond being put in 6 years worth of inconvenience during construction and all the other issues that go with it. So I think the net benefit is a matter of opinion and which side of the fence you're sat on.
I understand the point that you're making. I'll give the applicant an opportunity to come back on that once more if you want, or you can leave that with me.
Ma'am, I think if we could come back on that first of all with Catherine, and then of course the other benefits that Rahul and Mr. Gillis perhaps could sort of conclude on as well on this.
That's fine.
I take Mr. Henderson's point on, and I definitely acknowledge it. I think to go back to the initial question though as well, which is looking at all these impacts in the round and the balance. In developing the project and in shaping that, we have obviously taken on board comments from the local community, statutory consultees, and the proposals as submitted have been shaped and evolved in that process. I think it can be demonstrated via the fact that there are no statutory objections, and that the Highland Council Committee report says on balance that this project, when taken into account, that this proposal accords with the principles and the policies that are relevant to it, and that on balance this project is acceptable. So therefore, taking all that into account, and of course recognising Mrs. Henderson's points, that on balance this project has the potential, yes, to have some impacts, and we've tried to mitigate those as far down as reasonably possible via the measures secured by condition, but it also has the potential to have significant benefits as well, both within the red line boundary and outside of it as well within the locality. So on that basis, I just passed over then to Ian and Bob on the final points.
Okay, that's fine. Mr. Gillis, do you want to go next, please?
Well, merely just to say, I suppose that in terms of societal benefit, the whole objective of the project is to support the government policy on decarbonisation. And although that's clearly a very wide scale, a large scale benefit, it's also a local issue. Don't want to flog the point too much, but we're already seeing effects from climate change in Scotland, and I dare say one can argue about exactly what those are, but I think general consensus is we are. So I think we would say that the project does support not just the wider community, but actually local communities as well. I mean, I know this is a wide a wide point, but I think it affects us all. So I would certainly suggest that the project does aim to mitigate some of those adverse effects from climate change, as propelled through overall policy objectives. Bob, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I would just sort of add to the issue of security of supply as well, which I think is also very important. By having generation capability in the region and close to the community does enhance, it does reduce the risk of power cuts. It makes sure that security of supply is there, and obviously that has far-reaching implications in people's health, well-being, and businesses as well. So having a resource available to provide that security of supply support is important. I would echo Ian's points on sustainability, because there is clearly enabling wider sustainability benefits, but also local sustainability benefits, the community benefit that comes of that, that might, I take the point that it could have happened anyway, but I mean, this makes sure that it will happen and will be delivered as a benefit to the local community and will be funded to do so. So there's a sort of global sustainability, but a local sustainability element to this, which I think does present a gain. And then ultimately, coming back to the point that we discussed earlier, if it improves the efficiency of the power system overall, that will flow through to customers in terms of lower costs than they otherwise would have paid without a facility like this. Improving the efficiency of the power system will provide benefits to consumers as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we've covered the kind of net benefit in quite a broad range of issues and matters that are discussed. I've also obviously got a lot of information in writing, and there'll be an opportunity for closing statements on that as well. So I think it'll be important to just kind of home in on those aspects that you want me to take into account in your closing statements. And really useful if you can, in your closing statements as well, point to particular it documents paragraphs elsewhere, rather than reiterate that in a lot of detail in your actual statement. But if you can point me to where the information is already held or submissions that you've already made, then that would be really useful, and we can keep the statements fairly succinct and to the point, I think, which is the purpose of them at this stage. Okay, I'm going to bring it to a close. I think we've covered everything in enough detail that I would like at this point. And we've been going for about an hour and a half, which I think is long enough for everybody. But I feel as if we've reached the point where we've got through all the questions. So I just want to thank everybody today for your input. I think that went really well in terms of, I could hear majority of people the majority of the time. There were only small areas where it dipped out. But I think we captured the comments that are being made and didn't feel like I missed anything. As I said to you, this will be recorded, so it has been recorded, so it will be posted up. I don't know how quickly it'll be posted up. We normally kind of get it up in the next day or so. Callum can clarify for that. Just to reiterate my notes from this morning, and that we're going to be starting at 9:30 for session 2, dealing with landscape and visual matters. And that's for both days. And again, we'll just see how things progress on the questions that I have. It's that there are more questions. It's a wider subject matter. It will probably as well require quite a lot of documents to be referred to. Catherine's use of the marking things up, and that was quite useful actually. And it's just a kind of good practice maybe to think about. If you want to highlight things to me, you can do that. Or even, we can have an electronic version of documents. I'll have hard copy of the documents here as well. So I presume we'll be looking at visualizations, which are obviously need to be looked at in paper form. So bear with me on Thursday and Friday to manage all of that and do a virtual hearing session as well. So I just want to thank everybody again for this afternoon and for your time and your input. And I will see you on Thursday. I'll certainly see some of you on Thursday, not all of you on Thursday, but thank you for your input today.